couple seconds.
Okay.
Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, and this is the Sports Page with Bob Case. And today we have a very special guest. You're going to get a very unique view of the boxing world, not only because world champions are involved, not only because promoters and people in the business are involved, but you're going to get a perspective that you don't normally get. Teresa Tapia, CEO of Tapia Promotions, is our guest today, and we want to say thank you for her taking so much of her busy schedule out of her day to be with us. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate it. And Bob, when it comes to coming up with guests, every once in a while, we're going to come up with somebody who's a little bit original, and you've certainly got that here today. Thank you for inviting Teresa to be on the show here today.
Yeah, thanks, Harper. And Teresa, it's an honor to have you on the show. And, it's, how can I say it? It's a little bit emotional for me seeing you and talking, about all this stuff. But Teresa is like, she was, I can say it over and over again. They said Bob Arum promoted Johnny, and there wouldn't have been a Johnny for Bob Arum to promote if it wasn't for this young lady here. And what she did, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I've been around. I didn't just get off the Mayflower, as you guys know. I've been around. But I have never seen anything like Teresa Tapia. The loyalty, the dedication, the love. It's maybe one of the greatest love affairs I ever saw. And on both sides, they were, to me, I always looked at them as one. They were one. And Johnny was a loving, I've always said in my life, I only had one regret. I have a beautiful daughter, but I never had a son. And Johnny was the son I never had. I just adored that kid. I loved him. He was hilarious. He was smart as a whip. His mind was quick. He was fast. He was thoughtful. He was loyal. He was great to the fans. I never saw him big league a fan. I never saw him. He was good to the little guy. And Teresa was behind everything he ever did. And he idolized Teresa. You got to remember, this guy's mother was brutally murdered, stabbed 29 times with an ice pick when he was 7 years old. So he had no mother. His father was murdered before he was born. He really had, the people that raised him were junkies, and they were sending him out to steal syringes when he was 7 years old, and he'd watch him shoot up. They'd put him in cockfights when he was 9 years old with 15-year-olders, and if they lost, they would lock him in a closet and pour hot coffee on his head. So I've heard all the stories. I know the whole background, and so Johnny, that was God. I always say good is God. Angels. Teresa was an angel sent by God to go into Johnny's life. And through Teresa's mom, Annie, her brother, I called him Robert Gutierrez, the gangbanger. I loved that guy. He was Johnny's best friend. Teresa's mother was like a mother to Johnny. Her grandmother used to make me banana pudding every time I would go to Albuquerque. I loved her. She never knew anything. She never rat out anybody. She always says, I know nothing. And she knew everything. She was like a mob guy, the grandmother. Anyway, but the point being, I just love that whole family. And these things it's why it's so good to see Teresa. I'm going to let her talk. But it's hard to introduce her in 10 seconds. I have nothing but love in my heart for her and respect. And all the things I've watched her do and how she's handled herself with, this is a girl, from Albuquerque that's dealing with all these world-renowned rock stars and just handling herself beautifully. Outsmarted a lot of them, actually. And we won't say it because some of them are still alive, but she actually outsmarted a lot of them. They think they were getting the last laugh. No. She and I had the last laugh together on a lot of deals. But anyway, I'm just honored to have her here, and it's emotional for me to see Teresa, and talk to her. And I got to induct Johnny into the West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame, and Teresa was there with me, and that was such an honor. And Johnny's in 7 Hall of Fames, just to let you know, the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And the last thing I'm going to say, just to tell you about Johnny Tapia, Bruce Trampler, who is a Hall of Fame matchmaker for Bob Arum for 35 years, when he was inducted in the Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York, he gave a half-hour speech, and he is promoted and matchmake for every rock star boxer in the world. Everybody, from George Foreman to this guy, Oscar De La Hoya. In his speech, he only mentioned one fighter in the whole speech, and that's Johnny Tapia. So if that doesn't tell you anything, you don't got to be a rocket scientist to figure out the impact he had on people and the fans and the life and that's enough out of me. I want to hear from the beautiful Teresa. And Teresa, you still are not too hard on the eyes, kid.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank both of you for having me on the show. I watched the interview with Bob Arum and I was completely blown away. There's so much. You think you know a person because I've been around Top Rank and Bob Arum for many, many years. But hearing his story, I've always been a fan of Top Rank, but I think I'm even a bigger fan if that's possible. And I applaud, Bob's sense of interview style because he just makes you feel comfortable. And that's why he became one of my oldest and dearest friends. And we still constantly are, as he would say, scheming together. And, it was, we had a blast together and we still do. And there is a lot of things in the boxing world that he has witnessed and he has seen me evolve from this young woman to the person that I am now. There's been a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, but I have no regrets about anything that I had to, endure and that I went through, and it got me to where I am at today. And, I thank Bob for a lot of things because had he not been on that journey with me, being one of the only females in my very unique position, I don't know how it would have ended. And I say that very, very honestly and blatantly. And so thank you, Bob, for being there to guide me on my journey. It's been amazing. And here you are still doing the same thing. So I always give credit where credit is due. So I'll start with that and I'll let you guys ask away. That way we can go ahead because Bob and I can sit here all day talking about all the old times and stories. And he has my compliments and he has my heart, and not very many people do. So thank you for both thinking of me and having me on today. I feel very honored.
Well, you're very welcome, and we appreciate that. The fact that you and Bob go back so far and have been friends and are able to communicate with one another with that special link that you guys have. Bob has often said off the air, he goes, I always need a shower after I talk about the boxing world. It's a real tough world and it's just dirty there are times. And the reason that I gather that it was dirty is because the fighters are treated so disrespectfully after the fight is over. Everybody seems to get rich off of them, and they're the ones that are left hanging after a fight or two or 20 or 50. And we'll get into that a little bit. But Teresa, again, thank you for being with us. For the audience that doesn't know you, you're an Albuquerque girl, right? You're born and raised there. You left, you come back. Tell me a little bit about Albuquerque and your roots there and what that's meant to you from your heritage and your family. And even though you've been all over the world, it's still home for you. Tell us about that.
Well, I was born in Albuquerque and I lived here until I was about 11, and my parents divorced. I chose to move with my father. So I ended up going to school and growing up a lot of the part of my youth in North Hollywood, California, with my father and my stepmother. I moved back to New Mexico. My father died at a very young age, and I was 18 at the time. I came back to New Mexico and, reconnected with my mom, and, things were different. I met Johnny probably a year after that, and it was just a whirlwind. I wasn't here long before he was legally and literally kicked out of the state of New Mexico due to legal problems. So we moved to Big Bear, California. That was things with Johnny. It was always a whirlwind. I don't even know where to start, but I met him when I moved back to New Mexico, and things have always been a quick, crazy roller coaster whirlwind of a life with him. And even with his presence that he's not here physically, I still move in the same manner, and a lot of it is due to him.
Well, he was already fighting when you first met him. So
no.
Go ahead.
He was not. He was actually out on the streets. He had been exiled from boxing. At the time I met him, he had been exiled already 2.5 years. I didn't know Johnny as a fighter. I knew Johnny as something very different than what people know him to be.
Okay. Please forgive me because I thought he'd already had a couple of fights when you first met. But because of the exile, I misunderstood. Thank you for correcting me. You meet him on the streets. You got to let us know a little bit. What is it about him, his heart, the way you look in his eyes, the way that he was able to communicate with you in a way that he couldn't with others, that was a connection for the two of you. How did that begin?
I met Johnny. It was kind of a, it was, I was at a, it was a daytime barbecue. I had went with one of my cousins and her boyfriend, and they were going down to this barbecue, and there was a lot of bikers there, and it was, I walk in and I was very uncomfortable. I had, I remember walking in and I kind of stood by the doorway and was waiting for her to go get her boyfriend. And as I'm standing there, I look up and Johnny is sitting on a kitchen counter and he's right across from me. And there's, a cake of beer. And like I said, people, it wasn't overcrowded, but it was crowded enough for my liking. So I was standing by the door and, he walked over to me and he said, I'm Johnny Tapia. And I wasn't interested. I thought, yeah, okay, whatever. And, he kept trying to talk to me, and apparently I guess I didn't get the memo because he was this ladies man and he was this popular guy, because before I met him he had been in boxing and he was undefeated, but I didn't know any of that because I wasn't raised in New Mexico. I was raised in California, so this was all new to me, and he wasn't my type at all. But I remember, he kept coming back and forth, and he brought me a drink and I wouldn't accept it, and he called me a name that rhymes with witch. And I kind of laughed and just looked at him and said, what's your point? Didn't give him the time of day. And I think that got his attention. And all these people were teasing him, his friends, because I wasn't going for it. And it was kind of funny, like as the time went on, I'm still waiting for my, friend to come out, my cousin, to get her boyfriend so we could leave. And there was a lot of things that happened. I mean, so many. Just on that one part alone, I'd probably take an hour to tell you, so I'm going to gloss over it. But something had happened. I was seeing somebody who had recently cheated on me, and that person's cousin was there. And when I saw the cousin walk in, then I started being nice to Johnny, and it was just all this game, and Johnny gave me his number. Anyhow, I walk out finally and I leave, and I didn't think much about the strange encounter. And a couple of weeks later, I run into him again, and it's a very busy road in New Mexico called Central. It goes down 66 highway. And I remember sitting in the Burger King with my friends, and Johnny walked in again, full of life and bouncing around, and as only Johnny could do. And, I remember he looked at me and he said, I'm going to marry you. And I kind of laughed it off. And again, time goes on. And I remember, he was involved in a DWI. And I actually called him because I was worried about him. And he answered right away and he said, come pick me up. And I said, okay, where are you? I lived in the South Valley. He lived in Wells Park. I had never heard of Wells Park. So I rushed down to go get him. And back then we had pagers, and he kept paging me, and his code was 00. It was kind of funny because I couldn't get there fast enough for him, but I kept delaying my arrival because he kept calling me. And so I had to stop, find a phone booth, call him back. And again, I'm on my way. Anyhow, I pick him up, and, he takes over. And it was just a strange first date because I remember going in and there was a lot of people in his yard, and he takes me in to meet his grandparents, and they're packing all of his stuff and loading it in my car. And I'm like, what is going on? He told everybody it was his girlfriend. It was our first date. And he's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So all his stuff's going in my car, and I'm just this young, dumb girl because Johnny was older than me. So I'm just watching like, what the heck is going on? So he takes over, he drives, he tells me, let's go to a bar. Well, it wasn't 21 yet. And I told him I'm not old enough to get in. He said, don't worry. He takes me to a bar that I could get into. We play pool. I whip his butt. I was always better at pool than Johnny. And it was so funny. He couldn't handle defeat. Then he took me to this other bar, which I didn't know it was a bar that people got shot at all the time, stabbed every day. Cops were there. And, he took me to that place, and we walked in. I was just happy to be in over 21, being under 21. I was happy to be ordering drinks and stuff. So it was kind of funny. Like, I had a blast. I was sitting there, and I didn't know what he did there. And most people didn't know, but Johnny had a very interesting career. I can talk about it a lot now because he is no longer with us. So he can't go to jail for it. But he used to fight in a cooler at the bar, and that's how he was getting paid. That amongst other things that he was doing. And I remember he sat me at a booth and he told these men to watch me, and he took off, and I didn't know what was happening. You can hear people yelling. You can see money floating around. Well, they were betting on him. He was a champion there, but I didn't know that. I was very dumb and naive. And so I remember after, he gets his money, he walks out, He has like a case of beer cash in his hand, and has bumps and bruises and cuts on him. And I'm like, what happened? And I remember I learned that from that day, don't ask questions. And so we get in my car, and he's stopping me at all these different places. And again, I didn't really know him. And so we're going back and forth all over. And I remember, I'm driving at this point at the last house we go to, I'm driving, and we're going down South Coors. And I just remember, we stop at a stoplight. All of a sudden, Johnny jumps out of his car and he takes off running. And I'm, looking at him thinking, gosh, he runs pretty fast, but I didn't know what was happening. And he used to wear those like hammer style pants, and he was gone. As I'm watching him thinking, what is this strange guy doing now? There's a knock at my window. And so I turn around and I look, and it's police. So they tell me to roll down my window. And I'm again, still don't understand anything. And I'm kind of watching, and I roll down the window, and, the police are telling me, they put their flashlight in the car, and they asked me to step out if they could look in my car. And I said, go ahead. I don't do drugs. I never have done drugs. And so I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything that was happening. So they're looking in my car. They see residue on my seat, and they want to search it. I let them. Well, they find this huge pill bottle. I mean, a huge pill bottle, like an ibuprofen bottle, but it was full of drugs. And so, the cop says, "What's this?" Well, I honestly didn't know. And so he puts it on the hood of the car, and they do some kind of test. There's another unmarked car that comes by. The guy looked like a biker guy, and he's an undercover. And they had been watching Johnny all night, and they said that the cocaine, whatever test they did, it turned blue. I'd never seen cocaine, so I just kind of it was funny because I was like, okay. And they told me, we're not looking at you, we're looking for him. Can't give you his name, but if you tell us his name, we'll let you go. We don't want you. Well, my whole life, as Bob has told you, my grandmother, my mom, all of the way we grew up, you don't tell. Cops are not your friends. You're not sitting there trying to give them any information. It's just how we grew up, very, very guarded. And so I said, I don't know who you're talking about. I just met him. They said, we've been following you all night. So, they're asking me all these questions, and I lied. I said his name was Manuel. I said Miguel, Mike. I made all these names up. I said, I don't know. I just met him. They said, either you're a very good liar, you're telling the truth, but either way, you're getting arrested. So my first date with him, I got arrested, and I was charged with possession and intent to distribute. I was facing 8 to 13 years in prison. And I did like 7 years in jail. I couldn't tell anyone because who am I going to call? Like, it was funny. That was my first night of a date with Johnny, just so you know. And it doesn't get any better, and it doesn't get any softer. And I went through a lot, but that's how I kicked it off.
That's unbelievable. Welcome to the family, basically, right? It's going to be like.
Hey, tell them about your wedding day, Teresa.
So I do a 7-day jail stint. I get out, and again, I'm facing 18 to 13 years in prison. Never been in trouble other than tickets, like little frivolous things. I get out, and you got to remember, my mom was, I wasn't raised with her. She was very loose in her parenting, but my dad wasn't. I was raised with my dad. My dad was military. He did 2 terms in the Marines, and then he got out and then joined the Army, and he retired from the service, and he was very strict, very hard on me. He didn't allow me to be soft. He taught me to be very, very tough. And so here I am in trouble, and I didn't, and as soon as I get out and I go to my grandmother's home, the phone's ringing, and it's Johnny. And he shows up, and he was true to his word. He said, don't worry. He was trying to get me out of jail, but he didn't know my last name. It was our first date.
Oh my gosh.
So he said, but I'm going to get you out of it. And I thought, okay, that should have been my first red flag. No. So just imagine, I spent that one night with him, went to jail. I'm a felon now, or I'm going to be charged as a felon. And I end up, he comes around again. So 7 days, I can't say I knew him because I was just sitting in a jail cell. And then a few days later, he proposed to me. And I thought, he said, you're my ride or die. You're everything I wanted. I want to get married. And I thought, get married? And I remember my mom and grandmother, they knew him.
I need to get out of the pokey first. You need to bail me out first, right?
Right. But again, this shows you my mentality. I'm like, all right, let's get married. So within 10 days of knowing him, and 7 of them are spent in jail, we get married on the 13th day. And so our wedding was the Maloofs, the Maloof family, they're a huge family. They sponsored the wedding. They love Johnny and they took care of Johnny, and they wanted me to, I think they were looking for Johnny to be saved, and they thought, here, this is the first time he's getting married. Maybe this is the answer. So they threw all this money. We rented a limo. We had the hall. We had everything done. Family planned it. My wedding dress. I didn't see Johnny for a few days, and when he walked in, I did not want to get married. He looked like, I don't know. You think the Hangover movie was bad? He made that look like it was a walk in GQ magazine, because he looked like horrible. And I told my mom, I don't want to get married. And my mom said, nope, we're going through with this. Cleaned him up as best we could. We get in the limo. We go to the Wells Park Community Center where we, exchanged vows. And I remember we had a reception planned, called it all off. He had a party going on at my mom's house. We get there. I changed out of my wedding dress and I wasn't feeling good. I remember I had a cold and I was sitting there and my head was hurting. I just felt, awful. And Johnny was running around like the whole house. And I was just sitting there overwhelmed by everything. And I remember his cousin, he came in and he said, you want to see what you married? Go look in that back bathroom. So I remember walking to the back bathroom and I see Johnny in there and he's with another male and they're shooting drugs. And he slams the door on me. I kick the door down. It's too late. And I'm thinking, I've never witnessed anything like this. And all I can think of is, what the heck did I step into? And I remember, he didn't care. He was already high. He took off outside. Cops came because he was fighting outside and they were going to arrest him. And my mom pleaded and she didn't know. I didn't tell anyone what I witnessed. And she, told him, that's their wedding night, let them go. So I remember, the cops said, take him out of here and we'll let him go. So they said, you drive, because he was drinking. I hadn't been. I was sick. So I get in the car and I'm driving and we get like 2 blocks away. Johnny says, pull over, and he takes over the wheel. The Maloofs had this beautiful, beautiful suite for us. Johnny he refused to go there. Instead, he takes me to this hotel. Well, not a hotel, a motel, where all these prostitutes and druggies were. And he says, we're going to stay here. So we walk in and I put my bags down and he, not even 2 minutes, he says, okay, I got to go make a call. And I said, there's a phone right there. He said, no, he actually took off with our wedding money and my car and was gone. And I didn't know what to think of it. So I called my mom after a few hours and I said, Mom, change plans. Because I always let my mom know where I was. I said, we're at this, motel. And it was called the French Quarters. And I'm sitting there and I'm spending my honeymoon alone. I don't tell anyone Johnny's gone. And I'm just think my whole night of what I'm thinking. Next morning, there's a bang at my door, 7 a.m. I go to open the door and I'm thinking it's Johnny and I'm going to rip him a new one. It's my mom. And she's hugging me. She's crying. And I'm like, what's going on? And she says, Johnny's dead. Johnny's dead. And I said, what? They had called her. They found him overdosed and he was DOA in my car. And I had to go identify his body. I wasn't even married 24 hours. So I remember it being in shock. And I get in the car with my mom. And I rushed to this hospital and I wasn't crying or anything. I was in shock. I was this young girl who didn't know any better. And I remember walking into the hospital and I'm thinking, gosh, like, there's just so many thoughts that were flooding through my head. And as I'm trying to figure out what the next steps are, I see a commotion and there's security and cops running. And I look and there's Johnny. Hi, babe. Bye, babe. And he's wearing a hospital gown and his butt cheeks he has no underwear on. And I'm like, what the heck? And I'm in shock again because I'm prepared for the worst. And there he is running from cops and security. And I mean, jumping barriers and gone. And so the cops are like, do you know where he's going? I'm like, I don't know anything. And I really didn't know anything. So I walk out of there and I'm in the car with my mom and I'm like, I can't do this. And she's like, nope, you're married and this is what you do. You will take care of him. You're his wife now and you are not going to give up on him. He needs you. And I was like, I don't want to be married. And we're arguing about me not wanting to be married. And I see Johnny running down Lomas Boulevard, which is a very popular road. And he's still in his hospital gown. So we honk, he jumps in. We get home. And, he doesn't tell me what happened. Instead, he goes to sleep like the dead for like days. And when he finally gets up, my grandmother's cooking for him. He eats. He says, I'm going to go take a shower. He goes to the bathroom. And, I'm like, he's taking a long time. So now you got to remember, I am PTSD'd out over Johnny because I don't know what's going to happen next. So I go into, he wasn't coming out of the bathroom. I'm knocking at the door. Finally, I go around to the window on the outside. He's not even in there. He had taken off. I didn't see Johnny again for 3 weeks. And when he walked in, he was skinny and wearing the same clothes, and he smelled. And that was my first month of marriage.
What a whirlwind. Are you kidding me? There's a book already, and he wrote a book. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But my goodness, welcome to the family. You spent a month and you've seen him for a total of about 8 minutes, right?
Yes.
Give or take?
Yes.
There had to be something there, though. When did Johnny finally let you know a little bit about what he had come from, where he was,
Well,
his
he never.
family situation, and things that were really important for you to be able to figure out this very complex young man?
I don't think that he ever let me know. It was just more of what I witnessed. And, because like you saw our first month, and after that, he would disappear often. And, it just was a pattern. He'd come home and he'd take care of him, nurse him back to health, and he'd disappear again. And I witnessed a lot of crazy, crazy things. And I remember just being this little girl. And like I said, I can safely say these things now. But I remember there was this one spot he used to go to not far from my house. I remember one night he had called me and he said, "Can you bring me something to eat?" And back then, Allsup's burritos were open 24 hours. So I had went and I bought him some food, and he said, "Whatever you do, don't come in through this door, come in through the other door." So I thought, okay, fine. I walk in the wrong door because I'm dingy, still dingy to this day. John used to say, "You're the smartest, dumbest person I know." And I am. So I walk in through the wrong door. I go into this shop, and there's like a garage area, like a bay area. There's a pig hanging upside down. They're draining him from a hook. But there's also a man hanging upside down. And I just remember looking at Johnny. He said, "So you're not coming home tonight, right?" And he said, "Nope." And I was like, "Got you." And that was it. And I walked away. I never asked questions because it wasn't my place. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know for a lot of reasons. So that was the kind of life that I would see. I mean, he'd come home after days. I remember another time I can talk about this. Frank's no longer here. That was his security. They walk into my house one day and they're holding this bloody like blanket. It looked like a beach towel blanket type thing. And I remember, I don't know what was in it. And Johnny's like, "I'm going to hide it here. If the cops come, you haven't seen me." And I'm thinking, "I haven't seen you. You just got here." And I said, "Johnny, don't put that in my closet." And he's like, "Oh, you're not going to help me with it?" And I said, "It's not that I'm not going to help you. That's dumb. That's the first place I'm going to look." And so I said, "Let's go outside." And I remember we had these old metal barrels that we used to burn stuff in. I said, "Dig a hole, put it under there." And I put these, in New Mexico, we have ristras, which are chili, and you hang them. So I said, "We'll put the rista over it, the chili rista, and then we'll cover it with barrel." And he's, "Oh, okay, pretty smart." So he takes off. 3 days later, there was no police or anything. He comes back and he said, "Did you, did anybody come looking for me?" I said, "No." I said, "All right, I'm going to get that. I'm going to get rid of it." I said, "But what are you going to do with it?" And he says, "Oh, I'm going to throw it in the river. I'm like, "Johnny, just throw it in the barrel and burn it, And I, again, don't know what it was. Didn't ask. I could not tell you any of that. And that was our life though. And it was one thing after another, after another, after another. There's multiple layers of stories that are just as crazy as that. Some of them crazier, some of them that I'll never be able to talk about. But that was my life. And nobody knew what I was going through and the craziness I dealt with, but also nobody knew the craziness that I already had dealt with being a woman. Well, at that point I was a woman, but growing up, I grew up in a very crazy background myself. Johnny's mom was murdered, but I had endured my own type of trauma. So I believe I was created for Johnny to help him because by the time I met him, my trauma equaled his. And so when we met, there was no stopping either one of us. I mean, there was nothing he could do that would make me run away from him. There was nothing he would do that would scare me because he never abused women. He never abused children. Those are the things that would make me run away. Yes, he did what he did, and Johnny was a lot, but he was the greatest guy you would ever know. And I know that sounds, you know, funny, like I'm opposite of what I'm saying, but that's just who he was. He would give you the shirt off his back. He would fight for elderly, the youth, anybody, me, he'd kill for. So that was kind of what you had in Johnny. So that's how we started it. And there's so many stories before I even became a fighter that led us to the road where I'm at now.
It's so interesting that you say that. And Teresa, I appreciate you volunteering that you had your own traumas that you helped deal with. In an average relationship, being able to see somebody for 8 minutes in the first month would be a sure telltale sign. And you told your mother, I can't do this. And your mom said, now stick to it, stick with this relationship. And thank goodness that you did. There were a lot of great things that happened, and you started with a lot of the crazy. So thank you for at least sharing a little bit of that. When did things get a little bit better for the two of you? Johnny had a lot of things going on that didn't include you, and he didn't want to include you. When would he spend time with you so that you could develop a relationship with him and just work on the love that you had between the two of you?
That wasn't until after our first year of marriage when I got to know Johnny, and I mean really get to know him. Forget all of the craziness, because remember, our life was the kind of background that I showed you. It was crazy. It was him in bars fighting. I remember him being stabbed and me taking him to hospitals from his nightlife. There was just so many different things. But I remember he had went to jail, and before he went to jail, we had taken this trip because I was pregnant. And I remember it was 4 months, and Johnny wasn't even around anymore. Like, he'd come and go. And I remember his grandparents coming to me and saying, we need to save him. So they took me to Mexico to go see a curandera, and Johnny, had agreed to it only if I went. So I take this trip out there, and it was just this weird experience. I remember being in this little, dilapidated house in Mexico. The floors were dirt. The curandera came. I remember she touched my stomach and I was freaked out. It was supposed to help cure him, but it didn't work. By the time we got back home, I had miscarried. Johnny was gone again. And that's where I had my breaking point, where I was like, it's just done. I'm not doing this again. And I wanted a divorce. And I was very serious about it. When I told my mom and my grandmother and everyone I'm leaving him, they kicked me out and let Johnny stay with them. So I moved out, and I went and I got this little place. It was a little 4-room apartment in a not the best area, so there was wrought iron everywhere. And I was working 2 jobs, and I wasn't communicating with Johnny. And then he got picked up and went to jail. And he was in jail 3 months. And I remember he would try calling me, and sometimes I'd answer, sometimes I wouldn't. But then during that time, things changed. Paul Chavez, his then manager and trainer, he came to my house and he said, I want to talk to you. And I didn't know anything about boxing. I've never seen Johnny in that light. I only knew the Johnny that I knew. And he comes to me and says, Johnny's been clean in jail. And he said, I think he can make a comeback, and I want you to take him back, and I'll pay half his rent for you. And I thought, take him back? I said, no, why don't you take him? If you believe in him, you take him. He said, no, he'd rob me blind. And I said, thanks. So you want him to come with me, but you don't want him with you? And I was like, and I said, I don't know, Bob, I'll talk to him. And so I started talking to Johnny. Johnny got out of jail. This was December the 23rd, and this was in 1993. And he gets out of jail, and, he's excited, and oh, I love you and everything. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm watching him, because you got to remember, when you go through a heartache of losing a child, and this man that you feel is who you blame for that, you're very hardened. So my guard was up, and I thought, whatever, Johnny. And then it was New Year's Eve. He said, I want to go see my no, it wasn't New Year's Eve. It was December the 26th, day after Christmas. He said, I want to go see my family. And I said, okay. And he said, I'll be back. And I went to go see my family. He went to go see his family. And I said, okay, Johnny, but if you do anything, I'm not taking you back. And he said, no, I got you. He took off, didn't come home till January 3rd, 1994. When he got home, I was so upset at him, because I thought, you did it again, when he walked in. But here was the difference. Something had changed in me. I was no longer that naive, believing, trusting, girl that he met. I had grown up along the way, and I had toughened up. And I remember he walked in the apartment. He was ready for an argument. I didn't give him one. I just said, go to sleep, Johnny, go rest. And then as he was sleeping, I got my phone. I got the keys to the car. I got everything I could think of, and I got rid of it. And I remember I called my mom before I got rid of the phone, and I said, look, I'm not doing this anymore. He is going to change one way or another. He's changing, or I'm leaving him. I don't care what anyone says. Maybe I lost it. Maybe I tipped over to insanity for a minute. I don't know what it was, but I got the only key we had to my apartment, and I cut a little piece of carpet, hid it under there, and I told my mom, come and make sure we're alive every few days, bring us groceries. And that was it. When Johnny woke up, he was like, oh, I fed him. He took a shower and everything. And he was, trying to get out. Couldn't get out. Every window had wrought iron. The door had wrought iron. And he said, I'm trying to leave. I said, not opening the door. There was no phone, no way to communicate. We had no cell phones back then. He was mad. He went through this transition of anger. And I remember he started breaking everything, fighting with me. I didn't care. I would laugh at him. I laughed at him. He started going through withdrawals, which showed me he wasn't clean in jail. It was another lie. I watched him get sick. He went through, like flu-like symptoms. He was writhing on the ground. He was in pain, agony. And I said, good. Now you're going to get a little bit of what I've been feeling. And I just was very cold. And anyhow, he went through that for about a week. And then after the sickness, it turned to anger. He threatened, we fought, we boxed each other. He broke everything in the house. I still wasn't opening the door. He didn't understand how stubborn I was until that moment. And so then it was defeat. But here's what happened. After a couple of weeks, Johnny started running around the little apartment, running in place, doing push-ups, sit-ups. I've never seen that side of Johnny. And then he looked healthier. He was getting stronger. His mind was clear for the very first time that I've ever known him. And something magical happened. That's when we truly bonded. And that's when our love became kind of mystical, because that was when the connection was formed. And it was the most glorious 7 months of my life. If I could give back everything other than my children being born, I would go back to those 7 months of being with Johnny, being poor, being in the smallest place, having no luxuries. That was my favorite time with him.
Teresa, just so much there. Thank you. I also want to ask, I have to say this in fun. There were times where you didn't want anything to do with him, and the family took him and said, you get out of here then. How on earth did that happen? What did people see in Johnny that made them go, he's acting really goofy now. He's all over the place, but there's something that they loved about him, or there's something about his character. What drew his personality to others in a way that said, you know what? You're his wife and you're being faithful, and you got to get out of here. How does that happen?
My mom just bonded with him as a mom. And, they both needed that. My mom had other children, but Johnny didn't have another mom. And the way he treated my mom would go to the bars and pull him out by his ear. And everybody would laugh because she'd go in her nightgown and her robe, and they would see her walk in and they would point, look, there she is, Johnny.
And he had to allow that, right? He could have easily said, get out of here, lady. But he went by the ear with the woman who had the authority to do that. Is that a fair way to assess that?
Oh, yeah. He loved her and he respected her. And my grandma loved him. And so they would take him, and he never disrespected. Like you said, what did Johnny have? Johnny had this charisma that you cannot find. He had a loyalty that you can't find these days. The charisma alone, you met him right now, you could just see him get out of jail and you can hear all these bad things about him. And maybe you never met him before. Then you would look at him and be like, oh my God, he's a great guy. That was the general consensus with people.
100%. It was. I used to tell Teresa, we couldn't stay mad at him. No. We could not stay mad at Johnny. He was the most lovable kid.
He was, definitely. And he was very humble, and he would put a smile on your face. He just wanted everybody to be happy. But my mom would tell me, he doesn't have parents. He doesn't have someone in the family to welcome him and hold him. You do have that. And they took his side. And yeah, it was hurtful at the time. My brother Robert, who Bob calls the gangbanger, we called him Gordy. That was his childhood nickname. Him and Johnny were inseparable. So but I kind of felt good about that. Even though Johnny was still doing bad, I knew my brother was with him protecting him, but I also know he was getting my brother into messes. It was always a catch-22 with Johnny, because remember, if he wasn't with me, he was with my brother. That's just how it was. They never went anywhere without each other. And the times they did, I knew that there was a big danger. Something bad was going to happen. And it always materialized just that way, because my brother kept him out of trouble. So there's like I said, there's so much, but you're asking me. So that's 7 months. So those months I locked him in the apartment. But Paul started coming and taking him to run, and then he'd come back and we'd lock him in under lock and key again, and then he'd be let out for training. And Johnny told me I'm making a comeback. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know anything. I was just happy he was clean. And March the 27th of 1994, I understood it. He fought under Tommy Morrison's card in Oklahoma and he fought Jaime Olvera. And I remember back then women weren't allowed. I never went to training camp. I wasn't allowed around Johnny. I remember I drove up with my brother and Johnny's brother and my mom, and we drove to Oklahoma. And I remember sitting in the audience in the nosebleed section, and I was scared, crying. I remember Johnny calling me because I wasn't allowed to see him. And I told him, I don't care. I'll work 3 jobs. I don't want you to get hit. That's how I was. I was like, I was so scared for him. But sitting in that audience and watching him fight, it was like, it's still emotional, because I understood what his destiny was and what he was meant for. All the hardships, it all led to March 27th, 1994. So watching that happen, then things were a whirlwind. By that same year, he won an intercontinental title. That same year, he won his first world title. It was just another whirlwind. I wish I could tell you. And I say 7 months because after the 7 months, he ended up in jail. He slipped. He fell from glory. I had to move him in the middle of the night. It was another mess. That was our life, though. It was what it was. I can never sit there and tell you, it didn't matter how much money he made, how many titles he won, how many shows he was on. He was on Resurrection Boulevard. He just was killing it in the ring, but he was also killing himself out of the ring, if that made sense. And I was along for the ride on both ends.
It does make perfect sense. And there's a lot of things. Bob mentioned it briefly. You mentioned, his family situation is so unique. My goodness. Can you talk a little bit about when you began to understand that? And did that help you develop a greater love and appreciation for the man who had been through so much as a kid, as a child, and kind of use that anger or use that trauma to help him be the best fighter in the world he possibly could be? Can you express that, how that worked at least in your mind's eye?
Well, when we were in that apartment for those 7 months, we talked a lot about, he would tell me stories about his mom and how he was the only child and she bought him, he had ponies. He had little motorcycles. He was like the rich kid in the block, but he also was very honest. And he said his mom, was only in love and attached to people that made their money in not the right way. And he had stabbed his stepdad for his mom because he had hit her, and Johnny was like 6-7 years old, stabbed the stepdad with a steak knife. He was very protective even as a little boy. So Johnny described to me, I remember holding him when we sat there one day in our little apartment, and he cried, and he said that he remembered vividly when he was a boy of his mom taking him to his grandparents. And he said that here he was, this little happy boy with his mom, and for some reason he didn't want to stay with his grandparents. And he loved his grandparents, he loved his cousins and his uncles and everybody, and it was always a joy to go there. But that particular day, he begged his mom not to go, and he cried. And he said, I'll never forget it. He knew everything. He said she was wearing blue slacks and a white blouse, and he begged her not to go. And his mom was beautiful. She was 5'7". She probably weighed about 118 pounds, blue eyes, black hair. She looked like Priscilla Presley. She had a cute figure. She was, a knockout by everyone's terms. And he said, he's begging and holding on to her. and that she took a Snickers candy bar out of her purse and she handed it to him. And she said, I'll be back. So she took the sister's Pinto. She borrowed the Pinto, took off to pick up her friend. And her friend was waiting for her. And her friend was a drug addict, from what I understand. They left. And the mom, Virginia, at that time was seeing someone else because the guy she had been with and went to prison. And so she was seeing someone else. And Johnny said he was so restless that night and he wouldn't sleep and he was looking out all the windows and he remembered a vivid memory of seeing this truck. And he always said it was like a blue or green truck. And he said, I could see my mom chained. And he woke up the grandparents. No one believed him. They threw him back to bed. The mom never came back. And he said and again, the way we were all raised, including in Johnny's family, you don't call police. You just you just suck it up and you take it because you don't feel they can be trusted. So nobody reported her missing. Days went by and the newspaper ran an article and she had this very unique jewelry that she was wearing. And they had taken a picture of the jewelry and said there was a Jane Doe that had been admitted into the hospital. If you recognize this jewelry, and they gave the details of the hospital. That's how they found his mom. Grandparents recognized the jewelry. They went down. She was in a coma. She had been stabbed 22 times. Her left breast was almost severed from her body. She had suffered. They found her in a gravel pit. And in her story gets even worse. The person that did it snuck into the hospital, hit her over the head, tried to finish a job. Again, no one cared. She was a Latina woman back in the 70s. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. So she died and Johnny had begged to let him tell her bye. They didn't. So he saw her in her coffin and his life changed forever. He went from this spoiled little boy to this boy who wasn't wanted. And he was thrown everywhere and the grandparents already had 14 kids of their own. They were already raising another like 8 grandchildren because the parents were in prison. So they didn't want another mouth to feed. They didn't have the money. And they shipped Johnny off to this place that's on the border of Mexico and in Texas. And the place didn't have any windows. It didn't have any running water. You used to have to bathe in the river. Well, Johnny bathed in the river and he got caught in a current, ended up at the Border Patrol. So it was too much trouble. So then they sent him packing back to the grandparents and the grandparents finally adopted him. And then he grew up in I know a lot of people would call it abuse. I honestly think it was more ignorance. It was just about who was the toughest and it was the fit of the survival of the fittest. And I mean, he was thrown in this world where he was a scrawny little 8-year-old and he was put out in the street corner because everything was about pride. It's this Latino Chicano way of you're in a gang and you got to be the best and the toughest. And, it's just what it was about. Nobody knew any different. It was more of a ignorance-based upbringing than I would say abuse because it's all you know in that world at that time.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And he goes from, as you said, like a little spoiled kid to where now he's out on the street. He has to learn to fend for himself. And was it during that time that he learned how to fight, or at least tried to learn? I mean, he probably got beat up a couple times. Most kids do before they learn how to throw a punch. They get hit a few times beforehand. Do you know if that was something that was a part of his life back then too?
Definitely, because you had to remember, so he was the only child with his mom, but when he got into the world of his grandparents, he became their child, which were his uncles and his aunts. He gained them as brothers and sisters. But they were already all in like their 20s and, strong grown-ups. And they were always beating, him up and telling him go fight. And they would put him against neighborhood kids that were twice his size. But that's what it was about. It was pride. It's who they were. It was a prideful, who's the best. Because you got to remember, Wells Park, the little vicinity around there, it's not huge, but they were tough. And to be a part of Wells Park, you had to earn that. And you couldn't they were grooming him to be one of them. And they were all Wells Park gang members. And Johnny fell into that. And yes, he got beat up, but then he learned how to fight, and he learned how to fight well. The grandfather was a champion boxer himself. He didn't make it to the world ranks, but he was a champion back in those days for amateurs. And he had this big canvas filled with sand hanging on a tree in the yard. And his grandfather stayed fit, same weight that he weighed since he was 18 till the day he died. He ran every morning. He hit the bag. He saw something in Johnny, and he started training him how to box. And so he did see the talent.
Well, thank goodness for Grandpa, because there are some kids that are on the wrong end and they get hit once too many times, and that's it. They're never going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
When you started to see him fight, and you mentioned his first fight where you were there, and there's not a lot of women at the training camp, and you certainly weren't allowed to be that. What impressed you with his ability? I think Bob would have a different perspective and say, wait a sec, this guy, it was his feet and his patience and his ability to strike when he needed to. There's certain boxing techniques. You as his wife are looking at it at a completely different angle, and you're not into boxing. You just weren't. What was it about that first fight that captured your attention to where you go, not only is this something special, but this is my husband and I want to protect him? Yes, obviously, but he is pretty good. My goodness. What impressed you? What was something that you learned from that made you realize that he had it, whatever it is?
It was the heart.
Okay.
It didn't matter what you threw at Johnny in life. What I learned watching him in that ring the very first time, he was never going to give up. It didn't matter what life threw at him. He was always going to persevere. And I guess that's what I saw unfold. That heart of his, it was one of the strongest, bravest, loving hearts that you would ever know in your lifetime. And I saw it because, like, you just see this man in this ring, and it's my first time. And I had only seen him fight in coolers, and he still had that heart. I mean, I'd seen him get stabbed in these coolers, behind the scenes. I've seen him in street fights. I've seen him on drugs. I've seen him in jail. But I had never seen him in that square stage, center stage. And when I did see him, it all made sense. But what I also learned was it didn't matter who they threw at him in the ring, because what he had in life was always going to be harder. And I knew that. And I think Johnny knew that. And that's what made him a great fighter.
Well, his first professional fight is a draw after 4 rounds, but then he goes on a little winning streak. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating is how many fights he would have in a year. Some years there would be 4 or 6 or 8. There was one particular time where he had 2 fights in the same month. There's not a whole lot of recovery. When did he start to realize, I'm not only good at this, but I'm going to move up the rankings and I'm going to be one of these guys? I could eventually be a contender. What was going on through his mind at that time? Is that something you can share?
So I wasn't around for the first part of his career. He was undefeated, and from my understanding, that's when he was kicked out. That's when he first discovered drugs, and that's when he was exiled from boxing. So I didn't know him then, but he told me that Johnny was a very cocky, arrogant Johnny, but when he was kicked out of boxing and he made his comeback, then he was very humbled. So I didn't know that Johnny, but a lot of people that knew him, he kind of, because you got to remember, Johnny was in the top of his game. He was going to be fighting for a world championship title. Top Rank had just negotiated a deal for him for a Pepsi commercial. He was going to get paid $1 million. He had everything in the grasp of his hands, and he was doing wrong and doing drugs and doing all these things. And somebody had basically ratted him out, and all of his house of cards came tumbling down. And then he was all over the media. He lost everything he had. So I didn't know that Johnny. The Johnny that I knew when he came back, the magic word, if you wanted to get Johnny to do something, the magic words or magic phrases was, you can't do it. Then he was going to show you that he was not only going to do it, he was going to surpass everybody's expectations. And he had a lot of doubt coming back. When he fought Jaime, they were like, oh, there's Tapia. He's a veteran. He'll never be the same. He's going nowhere. Johnny would read that stuff and it would anger him. And it would make him want it even more. And I will give Danny Romero credit. He's another fighter from New Mexico, because as Johnny was flailing in the wind before he made his comeback, he used to be upset because a new kid on the block, Danny Romero, was taking all of his hype, and nobody was talking about Johnny in boxing anymore. They were talking about this other kid, and Johnny hated it. He could not handle it. So I think that made him want to do the comeback. And when he made the comeback, right away they were compared. And I think it just kept motivating Johnny because he didn't want anyone to steal his thunder because he was the one that people loved. He was the New Mexico hometown kid, the hometown champion. And here's this other kid on the scene. So Johnny had a lot of reasons to be motivated at that time.
Yeah, no kidding. And the motivation obviously starts working. He's winning fights. He's winning more. He's moving up in the rankings. He's getting paid a little bit better. Did the running around and sprinting out of cars and leaving pill bottles full of cocaine, did that begin to wane too? Did he start to get a little more serious and get off the dependencies that he had?
No, he didn't. I wish I could say yes. No, it was always, and if you look back through the history, he was always being arrested. He was always, something was always going on with Johnny. That's just who he was. And even if it wasn't public because he was getting caught, I made sure to hide it because it's what you do. It's what I was taught as a little girl. Cops would come to our neighborhood and it didn't matter what happened. We were taught you don't say anything. It's all I've ever known since I was a little girl. It's been embedded in me. So why would it be any different when he was fighting? And wasn't about hiding or being an enabler. It's just that's all the world that I knew was you don't say anything. So I swept it under the rug, and you would laugh. There'd be times I'd be negotiating with Bob Arum, Don King, Dan Goosen, Frank Warren, Showtime, HBO, you name it. And half the time I'm sitting there pushing of why Johnny deserved more money. And yeah, I didn't even know where Johnny was. And I was hoping and praying that he wasn't going to get caught and be public in the newspapers because then all of it's going to become unraveled. But I'd sit there confidently arguing for him, and I didn't even know where he was half the time.
Amazing.
Hey, Harper, I want to interject something about one thing. As I've said 1,000 times in the show, I never took algebra, never passed it, but I do know sports. And I want to tell you this, having observed Johnny Tapia is one of the greatest all-around God-given athletes. Now think about it. He had everything, as Teresa pointed out, the greatest heart in the world. But to go along with the heart, he had a brilliant mind, brilliant for a guy that, wasn't educated. He was one of the smartest guys that you'd ever want to meet. He could just, and he was the smartest fighter in the ring. Besides, I would watch him do the jump rope, right, in training, and he'd get some Mexican music on, and the rope would become invisible. And Eddie Futch, who trained all the great world champions, said to me, Bob, there's only one fighter that I've ever seen anywhere close to this, and that's Roberto Duran. He did the rope with the Mexican music on like nothing I've ever seen. He could move around in the ring. He never got hit. I never saw him take a hard punch, ever. And this is the other thing about him. He would be in the ring, and if it was some tomato can, he'd screw around with him, get hit, lick his own blood, put his chin out, do this, do that, just jockeying for the crowd, waving to the crowd. But if it was somebody he respected, and I can name 3 or 4 of them, he never got touched the whole fight. I'm gonna let Teresa talk, but there's one guy named Danny Romero was huge. It was as big as any heavyweight fight. The good and the bad, the clean cut kid against the gangbanger, the Albuquerque. They had people checking people because of gangs and stuff. And when they had it in Vegas, all the people coming in, but it was huge. Okay. And the love for Johnny Tapia in the ring, the fervor from the fans I've never seen from any other fighter. They adored him, and he equally loved them. I never saw him big league a fan. He loved them. I've told this story many times. One time, Teresa and I and Johnny were eating in a Johnny Rockets hamburger place. And all of a sudden I say to Teresa, where's Johnny? He's disappeared. We couldn't find him. You know where he was? The Mexican chefs in there cooking went nuts when they saw him. He went back in, sat and talked to him for a half hour, signed autographs for him and took pictures with him. That's Johnny Tapia.
Wow.
That's Johnny Tapia. He always took care of the little guy. Always took. I saw, you know how many times I saw him giving money to a homeless person, doing this, doing that. He made millions, but he didn't care about money. He just cared. And Teresa, she gave him the family he was robbed out of as a kid. She gave him a real brother. She gave him a mother, a lover, a wife, a psychiatrist, somebody that he could trust. His whole family he loved. Okay, so that's what, you know, and that's all he needed to be, is loved. And that's why people loved him, because they sensed that.
Yep,
He
they
just
did.
wanted to be loved. So people adored this kid. Like,
did.
I've worked with every rock star in the world. Never have I seen a more loved athlete. Never. And I'm talking about Hall of Fame football, baseball, all that. Never have I seen somebody who was more loved. That's it.
Teresa, he's certainly got so many things going for him. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, family members are they've sensed it. They know there's something that's special about him. You know there's something special about him. How does that build in his mind to where he realizes himself, you know what, I've got a gift right now, and I'm defeating one fighter after another, and I'm moving up in the rankings. I could really make something out of this. There's a seriousness that you have to take. Bob mentioned the speed with the jump rope and the bag and all of the hard work that is associated with that. When did you start to realize that what he had, a very special gift, and to become a champion and wear a belt in a very short amount of time, from 94 to 95, 6, 7, he becomes champion of the world. Tell me about the flyweight division and what that was like for you, learning yourself about some of the intricacies of it and how important it was for him to be able to focus and concentrate. And when he did, he was a great fighter. My goodness.
Johnny, he knew that the fans loved him, but I think what made him special was he loved the fans more. He fed off of their frenzy. Like, he'd hear it, and it was so, I don't know, Johnny was just so in tune. And like Bob pointed out, you know, there was a lot of big fights. You look up the Danny Romero fight in the history of New Mexico, it was the least violent night here in New Mexico because everybody was glued to. Like,
everybody was at the TV or listening on the radio. Is that right?
Right.
No one wanted to go rob anybody or anything.
Nobody wanted to do anything.
Yeah.
They show this documentary on HBO, and the streets are empty because everybody was rooting for their hero, and their hero was Johnny. It wasn't Danny. You would think it would have been Danny being the clean-cut kid, but it wasn't. It was Johnny, because Johnny represented hope, and he was a person, because if you have lost your mother, if you were in a gang, if you had a problem with drugs, if you grew up in, you know, there were so many different facets of why people connected to Johnny, you know, but nothing was handed to him. Nothing was easy. And so you look at the first Paulie fight, the night he lost, Albuquerque had one of the most violent nights. The fans at the Paulie fight, Johnny's fans, jumped the Texas fans in the casino. There was bloodshed everywhere. That was how, like, because their hero lost, they were going to make him pay for it. And it was crazy. It was so crazy to see that.
It was a bogus decision.
Yes. I give Paulie credit as a fighter, and I'll always have a special place for Paulie and his wife, because when Johnny passed away, Paulie Ayala showed up to Johnny's services. Danny Romero did not. Danny Romero lives here in Albuquerque, and he couldn't be bothered to come in and say his goodbyes to a man that made him synonymous with history and boxing. But Paulie Ayala did. He flew all the way from Texas. That tells me everything I need to know, and I'll always respect Paulie for that.
You know what Bruce Tramper told me yesterday? He said, Bob, this shows you. He said, I fly into New Mexico. He said, I get on a cab. The cab driver doesn't know. He doesn't know anything about me. Mm-hmm. And all the cab driver says, the first thing he says to me, he doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know. He says, who do you like, Romero or Tapia? The cab driver. That's all he said to Bruce. And then Bruce said, and it's just Romero Tapia. I mean, it was like unbelievable. It was so huge, and that's everybody had their whole thing, and it was just tremendous. That shows you how big it was that a cab driver says to an anonymous driver, "Who do you like, Romero or Tapia?"
Hey, Bob, do me a favor. You told this story before we went on the air. The Tapia fans and the intensity that they would have was something that even rock stars, it was legendary. Give me your impression first, Bob, and then Teresa, if you don't mind, if you can confirm what Bob says, and then maybe you've got your own version of how special the relationship is with the fans. Hey, he's one of us. He's one of ours. We in Albuquerque, he's our guy, right? Bob, you go first.
Okay, first of all, I want to say, now this is what's very interesting about the Johnny Tapia fans. Sure, you had guys and gangs that loved him and guys in this. You know how many guys I knew that were doctors or lawyers that loved this kid? So he embraced everybody, not just street people or thugs, or he embraced all kinds of people, and that's what was really unique. You know how many guys, my doctor was, his favorite fighter was Johnny Tapia. I think he took extra care of me because he knew I was connected to Johnny. So, I look at that kind of stuff, and it's just amazing the attraction he had, and I have never seen that from any athlete. And I would be walking with Johnny, and there'd be mobs of people around him, mobs. And I remember we were walking one time, and we had an entourage around him, and there was a little lady sitting 100 feet away. And she goes, "Johnny," a little old lady. Johnny broke away from the bodyguards and ran over and hugged her and kissed her and signed an autograph for her. That's Johnny Tapia. In other words, his whole life was like that. I remember the eve of the Romero fight. We were hiding away in some hotel up in Vegas up there somewhere. And some guy with his kids said, "My son loves Johnny." And he came there. He wanted to get his autograph, right? And so he approached me, and I went to the hotel and said, "Johnny, would you sign something for you?" I didn't want to bother him, but I knew Johnny. Johnny says, "Bring him up here." The kid and the father went up there, and Johnny spent 20 minutes talking to him. Can you imagine that before a fight of that magnitude? Do you think that kid or the father will ever forget that their whole life? That's Johnny Tapia. That's who he was. That's who he just was the most beautiful soul, and loyal. You talk about loyal. I'm going to tell this one story, and then Teresa is going to talk, but this will tell you the loyalty. We told this story at Johnny's Hall of Fame induction. It's one of the funniest stories. We have so many. Would take the whole podcast, but this one you got to hear. Johnny's doing it. My brother-in-law was here from Sweden, and he'd watched all Johnny's fights in Sweden. He says, "Bobby, do you think I'll ever be able to meet Johnny Tapia? Do you think you could ever?" I said, "Yeah, well, I'll try to arrange it." So I get a phone call from Johnny. He says, "Bob, he was doing the color commentating for ESPN with Teddy Atlas in the Friday night fights. So I'm doing the fights down here in Palm Springs. Can you come on down? I'll get you two." I said, "Yeah, my brother, yeah, I'll give you a couple tickets." So we go down and we go to the fights. We park, we go, valet parking. This is one of the funniest stories ever. Valet parking. We go and we're leaving. Johnny, Teresa, and I, and my brother-in-law are leaving to go out for the valet parking. Okay, we're sitting there waiting for the cars to come. And Johnny says to Teresa and us, "You guys want some frozen yogurt?" Yeah. I'm gonna get some. Teresa, I'll get a vanilla. And so he goes to get the yogurt. And there's a guy on a cell phone, and I'm sitting with my brother-in-law, Teresa, and myself. And this guy is saying loud, right next to Teresa, "That effing C word, the C word. That effing C word. And he kept yelling it and I tapped him on the shoulder and I say, "Buddy, you see there's a lady sitting here?" And he looked at me and he kept doing it. So now listen, I was getting ready to dust the guy. He leaves, an SUV pulls up. This is hysterical. Johnny remembers getting the yogurt. He had eyes in the back of his head, I'm telling you. He's getting the yogurt. This SUV comes up, some bigger guy comes up, and he says to me, "Hey, you got a problem?" To me, his buddy. And the guy that was mouthing off is driving in the driver's seat. And this guy comes up to me. I said, "Yeah, I got a problem." And before I could say anything, like Superman out of a phone booth, Johnny comes flying over, bam, knocks the guy out,
Mhm.
goes to the guy sitting in the driver's seat waiting for, bam, hits him in the face. The guy's over the seat like this. The next thing I know, we have these cops in Bermuda shorts on bicycles with handcuffs driving up. They handcuff me and Teresa and my brother. They're going to take us all to the joint. We're all going to the joint. So they said they pressed charges on us. And Teresa says, we're pressing charges on them. And I don't think they had no idea this was Johnny Tapia, believe me. And so they said, we're pressing charges on them. So they go to them and say, they say they dropped the charges. So they unhandcuff us. We go out, and I'm telling you, we went out to a steak place and had a dinner that night. And my brother-in-law, I said to him, well, you got to meet Johnny Tapia. What was it like? That was his introduction to Johnny Tapia. It was, I don't think he ever got over that. But anyway, it was I don't think I've ever laughed harder in my life. Seriously. It was just tremendous. And the key thing is, this is where we started to press charges. I said, "Officer, what would you do if somebody was using the C word in front of your wife?" He said, "I'd be furious." And then he goes to Teresa and Teresa says, "And yes, he pushed me." He said, "He did?" And so that's when we pressed charges. And that was the key thing. And then she said they pushed him. So as we're going off to have dinner, I said to Teresa, "I didn't see him push you." And she said, "He didn't." That's called life with Johnny Tapia.
Teresa, you've got a few stories, I'm sure, yourself. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, that one was funny because I am, again, like I said, my whole mode was always to protect Johnny, and we couldn't let him get arrested. And I have lots of stories like that, and all the stories entail the same thing, and this is what matters. The stories entail Johnny defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Yes, Bob could have defended himself. I'm not saying that Bob couldn't, but I mean, you have all these people, you don't know who they're with. And it was always Johnny just intervening to help people. It wasn't like Johnny was this bully or he'd go and be a jerk, and he never did any of that. And I told when they were saying we're going to press charges, and I said, fine, pull the camera footage. I said, because he shoved me, and I was pointing at the guy and I was like, you shoved me, you did. And he couldn't remember if he did. So I was like, go pull the camera footage. So Bob's just looking at me, and that's getting everyone more heated. And we get in the car, and Bob says, and that's when he asks me. I said, no, they didn't. He said, well, what'd you have done if they pulled the camera footage? I said, I didn't think they would. And I was right, which they didn't. So that was the whole point. I was very convincing. I said, no, go ahead, pull it right now. And the guy got so scared of them pulling it because I was a female. I was like, a man hit a man, but he hit me first. So I'm a female. What is that going to tell you? So it was kind of funny. But yeah, there's many, many stories. But like we were talking about the fans, and the best story I could tell about the fans is, Sammy Hagar, the singer of Van Halen. He worked Johnny's corner when Johnny fought Barrera. And Sammy told me, and I'll never forget, Sammy said, I've played in front of stadiums of 70,000 people, 100,000 people. He said, but I have never, ever felt the electricity like I did for the fight with Johnny. He said, I never want to work his corner again. It was so much pressure. He said, it was the most amazing and it was the most surreal experience I've ever felt. He said, the hairs on my arm stood up. And you can almost, if you go back to that footage and they show good angles of Sammy, you can almost see him, and he's kind of like looking and looking everywhere. And because that was the magic that Johnny brought. And it was, his fans were, like I said, when he lost to Paulie the first fight, the New Mexico fans jumped the Texas fans. When there was, when Johnny and Danny were fighting, there was Southwest, and you can look all this up. It's all in the history books. Southwest Airlines had to turn their planes around several times because Tapia fans jumped Romero fans. I mean, it was that insane type of this frenzy of this love and this, everybody just, they loved him. And you see it now with my boys because they're both fighting. And it's crazy. I was telling Bob, it's amazing because people miss Johnny so much that my boys will have just a sparring session, and it's like you can't, it's elbow to elbow. There's no room to walk once they know that they're just sparring. So imagine like that magic is coming back. And it's simply because they were raised the way that Johnny taught them to be. And, people just, they miss Johnny. They miss their hero. Johnny, and I want to point out, Johnny, New Mexico has the best boxing fans, but Johnny was worldwide. His fans, I remember we'd go to Scotland, people would be crying. I remember being trapped in Las Vegas, Nevada. They see all types of stars. And I remember Johnny walking into an audience and we got trapped and the police had to escort us out. They kicked Johnny out of the MGM because they said it was enticing a riot because the fans stopped watching the fight and were jumping all over to get to Johnny. I mean, that was the kind of magic he had. It was amazing.
It was like absolutely 100%. 100%.
And Bob, go ahead. Please forgive me.
I was going to say, and Johnny didn't help matters because he loved his fans just as much. So as they're trying to get to him, Johnny's trying to get to them. And we're all trying to keep it safe. So Johnny kind of, had a lot to do with how the fans were, the way they would rush in and feel so entitled to be near him. Johnny felt like he was entitled to give them what they wanted.
Yeah.
I want to tell you another story about Johnny's loyalty to Teresa. And I've been around professional athletes, as you know, all my life. And they weren't, let's put it this way, they weren't all choir boys. But Johnny, now you'd think Johnny being a gangbanger, in and out of his rap sheet, Teresa was on a national TV show showing his rap sheet. She had stacks of papers of it. It was that thing with Jim Brown.
Mm-hmm.
What was it called?
HBO, it was called.
Yeah. Jim Brown was the host, the black guy. But anyway, James Brown. But anyway, I was at a fight. I'll never forget it. He had a couple stories. I would be with women when Teresa wasn't there, naturally, and they'd be mobbing him. And I saw a woman pull out her breast and want him to autograph her breast one time. And just crazy stuff. And one night, we're at the Mandalay Bay. It was the eve of the Barrera fight on Halloween. And Teresa wasn't there, and I'm with Johnny and the bodyguards. And there's about 8 women dressed up like cats, like pussy cats, and they're all gorgeous, and they all come up and want pictures with Johnny. So I always sometimes felt like the team photographer. I'd have to take pictures of him with the chicks, right? Well, there's one, the last one was a knockout, was all over Johnny, all over him, and her tickets were right in Johnny's face. And the bodyguard says to Johnny, that girl wants you. And what he said rocketed me. I will never forget it. He said, that's 10 minutes of fame. I'm working on a 12-year marriage. And you should have seen the look on the bodyguard's face when he said that. I'll never forget that as long as I live. And then there's another time we were in L.A. I think Goosen was there, Dan Goosen and Greg. And they said, hey, Johnny, you want to go across the street? There's a strip club and some of the girls I know over there, and same thing. He said, I'm married. I mean, who would think that if you look at Johnny and see all the shit he was in, you wouldn't think that's who he was. But you know why? Teresa was everything he never had in his life. And think about this, when he got sober and they really got, as Teresa pointed out, that was very interesting for me to hear when they really got connected. And that was the happiest time of her life in that little place. You know why? Because that's when they really came together. They really came, and they're up in Big Bear together. And I'm going to tell you this, for 6 weeks in training, Johnny was trained harder than any fighter I've ever been around.
Not always 6 weeks, Bob, but go ahead.
It what?
I said, not always 6 weeks. Remember the Daniel Romero fight? We had
yeah. But when he wasn't training, but see, here's the deal. Afterwards, he'd usually win. He won all the time, so he would celebrate after the fight. That was the problem. But the point is, he was just, and I used to worry about, because boxing was Teresa was his number one love. I would say boxing was his life, and that's how he felt he could bring flowers to Teresa by winning titles and being a Hall of Fame fighter. He thought we would love him more, which we really wouldn't have. If Johnny was a 25 and 25 fighter, he was still a lovable character. You know what I mean? But that was his way of showing, I appreciate your love. I can give you back world titles, and I can give you back all this stuff. And he was like a little kid, always wanting to be accepted. And he was, I mean, I'm telling you, this guy was loved by everybody. There's not, I don't know anybody that didn't love him. Don King loved him. Everybody loved Johnny. And it's just, I'll never forget when Don King signed Johnny. He says, "Here's my felon wall." He says, "There's Mike Tyson, a picture of Mike Tyson. There's a picture of me. There's a picture of Tony Tucker." And he says, "We want your picture up here." And Johnny said, "I'm in." And he signed the contract.
Bob, you also mentioned real quick before we get back to Teresa, the intensity of the crowd. Sammy Hagar said that it was electric.
Look, I've been to Super Bowls. I've been to World Series games. I've been to Super Bowl games. I've been to Ali fights. I've been to every world champion fight. I've seen them all. Manny Pacquiao. I've been to. Never did I see the intensity, especially in Albuquerque, even more so, than a Tapia fight. I was telling Teresa, he fought a guy,
Blanco,
on his birthday that I have never in my life heard the intensity. Rodolfo Blanco. And it was unbelievable, is the only word I can say to describe it. It was unbelievable. It lifted you right off the floor. It was like you're walking on water. I remember walking him in the ring, and it was one of the more memorable times of my life. Just unbelievable.
And Teresa, what was it like from your end? Here you are, you're his wife, and everybody knows. Do they treat you well? I mean, or do they get a little rough with you? I'm kind of curious as to how you are. You're a part of the entourage, so to speak, but you're in the seats. You're not exactly there when they're walking him in, but you're part of his daily life. How were you treated?
I actually was there when they were walking him in because I used to carry his belt. Was because you got to remember, I started off as his wife, not allowed in training camps, but I became a manager thanks to Bob because I was the only female boxing manager that was married to a fighter. The only other one at that time was Jackie Kellen, but I was actually married to Johnny, and that never happened in boxing circles. But it was Bob that's, after Johnny got kicked out of New Mexico and he needed a manager, and Bob sat us down and we all laughed. My brother and Johnny and I, we all laughed when Bob said, "Oh, make Teresa your manager." And we thought it was hilarious because women weren't accepted. And Bob said, "Wait a minute, laugh all the way to the bank. You've went to jail for him. You've done so many, like I had already done tons of things for Johnny by that time. So I became his manager, and I was always behind the scenes, and I changed the way that people looked at wives at that point, which it was something that I was able to pioneer. I didn't know I was doing it. I was only doing under the advice of Bob. And Johnny trusted me. And so here I was, my first negotiation with Bob Arum. I remember it was crazy. I was so scared, and dealing with Don. Don was this bigger than life personality. And I had just went to watch the movie Only in America. And then here was, I had to go to New York with Don, and things were just, but everybody treated me well. Everybody was good. I think I've only had, all the years I was married to Johnny, one time that I felt in danger, and it was a fan of Johnny's. It was an older lady. It wasn't like she was in love with Johnny, but she had lost her son, and he was a huge Johnny fan, and they buried him with Johnny's picture. And she started showing up to all these press conferences, and she kept telling Johnny it was his destiny, that he had to die. And it just got really spooky, and she thought I was standing in the way of his destiny, which should have been death. And this was back when Johnny was still at the top of his game and young, and before death was even thought of with him. So it was a little bit spooky, but that's probably the only time. The rest of the time, people they loved Johnny, and they loved anybody. Like Bob will tell you, he was part of Johnny's entourage, but they loved Bob. They'll lift up Bob. If they saw him wearing a Tapia jacket, there was no fear. They were gonna uplift him and help him. that's just how it was. They took care of all of us because they loved Johnny.
I got to tell you this other funny story that Teresa. It ended up funny because Johnny survived. But I was up watching an Oakland Raider game in Oakland, California, and I come back and my phone had over 50 messages. Johnny overdosed. Johnny's dead. Johnny's this. Johnny's that. I call up Teresa. She said, Bob, he's in ICU. He's going out. He's on his way out. Come up and say goodbye to him. I said, what? I'm in shock. So I get in my car after driving back from Oakland with no sleep from the NFL game. I get in my car and drive to Vegas. This is one of the wildest stories ever. I'm sitting with Teresa in the waiting room, and she says, "Oh, Bob, you want to go give him a goodbye?" Because we thought he was going out, right? Mm-hmm. So I walk in. All of a sudden, like Christ arising, Johnny opens his eyes. He always called me the Big Bopper. He opens his eyes and says, "Hey, Bopper, can you get me an In-N-Out cheeseburger?" I swear it was one of the most wild things.
It was a fat burger.
A fat burger, that's right. And it was the wildest thing ever. I thought he was dead. I was going to say goodbye to him. And he opens his eyes and wakes up and says, "Bopper, can you give me a fat burger?" I went nuts. I was so happy. I was coming up there.
Well, do you remember though, Bob, that hospital? We're talking about fans, but do you remember how they installed? You'd call the UMC hospital in Las Vegas, and it would say, if this is an emergency, hang up dial 911. If you need to reach radiology, they go through their spill. And the last one on there was, if you're calling about Johnny Tapia, a male who was admitted in ICU, we will give hourly updates, because they couldn't handle the amount of calls that were coming in. I had helicopters over my house. I had those, I had the production vans from all the television stations outside of my gates. I remember the hospital, it was that whole floor they secured. Do you remember all of how crazy it was and how many?
You had to sneak him out of there.
We did in the middle of the night. You got us at your friend Charlie.
Arizona Charlie's on Decatur. I knew the guy, Irving Marcus, that ran it. And so we put him in there under another name. And we hit him in Arizona Charlie's for 3 or 4 days. Because her house had all these media people and cars and trucks outside of her house.
And that what happened, just so you're aware, Harper, this was because Johnny had just fought Barrera, and Johnny was out doing what he shouldn't be doing. He used to have a hideaway house where he'd go and let loose and, do the stuff that he did. And at that time, he was hiding a relative who was a fugitive for attempted murder, who had already been in prison for murder. And somehow the U.S. Marshals found out. They went and broke the door down, and Johnny, being Johnny, swallowed all the narcotics, and so that they wouldn't give his relative an extra charge. We come home. I didn't know all this. I flew down to go pick him up, and he's fine. There was nothing wrong with him. Next thing I know, he collapses. We thought he hit his head. We didn't know what was going on, but it was because I guess one of the things had ruptured in his stomach that he took. He consumed so much, and he ended up overdose. It was a big thing, but that wasn't the first time Johnny overdosed. That was like the 7th time, maybe the 5th time at that time, maybe the 5th at that time. And he had already been
pronounced dead 4 times, right, Teresa?
Yes, DOA at least 4 times prior, and he still had a few more before he actually went away. This was the story, and that was our life. This is how it was. I mean, but people truly just loved Johnny because he bounced back from that and still came back to fight more, and still came, Johnny just had that amazing talent to just continue, and he used to say, no matter how many times you fall, that's not what matters. It's how many times you pick yourself up from the floor and do it again. Like, he was a firm believer. Like, you just don't ever count him out. That's what he would tell people. Don't ever count me out.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Well, the championships seem to roll in. The fans are supporting him. There's still some trouble, though, right, Teresa? He can't kick some of those habits. And talk a little bit about, in spite of world championships and belts, I just had a picture up of him with 2 belts and some of the amazing things that he was able to do in his life, and yet he still had his demons, if you don't mind me saying so, right?
Oh, it's the truth. Yes. So his first title was the most magical. I mean, it was at the pit in New Mexico. Johnny holds the record for having the most fans for that event, and it'll always be held because they've renovated and it's smaller now. But there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Second world title was significant because he fought for Albuquerque. So it was very meaningful because Johnny wanted to prove who was the best. That fight, leading up to the fight, a lot of craziness. Johnny trained for 2 weeks. He was in jail. He had boarded up my house with plywood. He was a mess. He didn't have a trainer. Danny was in the woods, in high altitude with all these different training people. And here we were thinking we didn't know what to do with Johnny. He trained 2 weeks, like really hardcore training. Third world title, I think, was the most talented display of a boxing lesson. If anyone was going to want to teach boxing, they should watch Johnny, versus Conadu.
Oh, perfect fight. Perfect. And this guy had more power than anybody ever fought, in my opinion. This guy could. Sammy Stewart, let me just say this. Sammy Stewart lived with me, and he fought Johnny, and he was a fighter. He said, Bob, I sparred with Nana Canadu down in Freddie Roach's gym. He said, whatever you do, he said he knocked me down in sparring. This guy had so much. He was from Africa. He had one of those little scars on his face from the gangs, in Africa, whatever they do. Anyway, he was scary.
Mm-hmm.
He said, whatever. Sammy Stewart said, Bob, don't let him fight Johnny.
Everyone thought I was crazy for taking that fight, including Bob.
I was scared. That's the only time I was ever afraid in a Johnny fight.
They told me, Bob and my brother voiced it. They said, you're crazy. I said, I believe in his boxing ability. I knew what I was doing as long as he didn't catch Johnny, but Johnny was quick. And I knew how quick Johnny was. So I wasn't worried. It was Bob and my brother, I think, for the first time that you both doubted me. And they thought I had lost my mind. Or maybe they thought I was mad at him. I don't know. But I knew what I was doing. Fourth world title, I would call that one the redemption title because it was after the Paulie Ayala losses, and Johnny had went through some deep down, like spiraling incidents where he tried killing himself. He stabbed himself. It was a mess. The fifth world title, it was because something else didn't happen, so he ended up with the fifth world title. He was supposed to fight Israel Vasquez as a sixth world title, which I believe Johnny would have won. The fight was announced and we had press conferences that didn't materialize. Johnny so IBA was another title. We don't even count it because the fight was so blatantly lopsided that the owner, Dean Chance of the IBA, because they were fighting for the IBA bout, he still gave the bout to Johnny.
I was there when he did it. Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, when he fought Manuel Medina,
yes,
you got to remember, Johnny, he was a junior bantamweight champion. He was a bantamweight champion. He was a junior featherweight champion, and he was a featherweight champion. Manuel Medina was a great featherweight fighter, believe me. Very, very, very tough fighter, and that's who Johnny won his fifth world title.
Well, six if we count the IBA, but yes.
Yeah,
and so
six,
all these titles, and the reason that the fifth world title, Johnny wasn't happy with his performance, but he was happy with the location because it was at Madison Square Garden, and it was always a dream of his to fight there. I wish they would have had Johnny in the back days, but they didn't. When he was at the top of his sport, that would have been surreal to see. There was times with Johnny that I can tell you with camp, he disappeared. I can tell you a funny story about him and Arturo Gatti. Johnny absolutely loved Arturo Gatti, but they weren't allowed together because when they got in camp, they disappeared on us. And we weren't allowed to ever put them together again because those guys were bad. Jose Luis Lopez, do you remember? El Maestrito. He fought on the undercard of Johnny's third world title. Johnny disappeared with him. Top Rank gives him $100,000 to sign on. Johnny and him disappear. There was so many funny stories in between. So it wasn't all gloom and doom. It was mostly fun. If you knew Johnny, he was actually a very fun character. As troubled as he was in the acting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because he did some serious
stuff. I laugh more with him. I mean, this shows you how Johnny is. Now, this is how sensitive he is and how I always say little things tell you big things, okay? Whenever I'd go and stay with Teresa and Johnny, he knew I liked he gave me ginger snaps one time, and I said, I haven't had a ginger snap since I was a kid. I love ginger snaps. Every time I came, he had a box of ginger snaps waiting for me. Just a little thing.
But
just
tell him,
how
thoughtful. Tell him your Blizzard story, Bob, and how funny. That's what I mean. For something serious, it always turned very funny. Tell him our Blizzard story.
Oh my God. The Blizzard story. Okay, you got to hear this. He wins another, he won another fight now.
That was after the Blanco fight for his birthday.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
And we're driving. Teresa, Johnny, and I are driving from Albuquerque to Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And we hit a blizzard like you can't believe. I mean, it was like a blizzard.
What Flagstaff. It was in Flagstaff. And they closed all the high.
See, the roads were stopped. There was snow 8 feet above the car everywhere. And Johnny's and Teresa's in the back seat with Johnny. And no, Johnny was next to me. Teresa was in the back seat. And so Johnny says, Bopper, he always calls me, Bopper, there's cops out there. So watch out. Be careful. There's cops. There's no cops. There's 8 feet of snow on all the sides of us. Okay. And he keeps saying there's cops out there. There's cops out there. Okay. So then he says, he thinks I'm looking at Teresa making eyes at her in the mirror. So he says,
and keep in mind, I'm not looking up. I'm minding my own business, reading the back.
I are making eyes at me.
Well, you know, if you were making eyes at me to flirt, or we were trying to, because he was high. He was very high, and a side effect of being high on cocaine, a lot of cocaine, is paranoia. And so he didn't know what Bob and I. He said we were talking with our eyes. If you remember, I wasn't even looking at Bob. I was in the back seat minding my own business, and the road, the highways. Yeah, the highways were closed. Diesels were pulled over. We had no choice but to exit. And so we exit, and there's only one motel room left in the whole Flagstaff. And so we pull off, and we have to share a room with 2 beds. And then you can take on the story from there, because it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think he was worried about Teresa and I. Was that the case? No.
Well, he was worried about cops, and then he said we were making eye contact.
Eye contact.
We pulled off. Yeah, we pulled off.
I wake up the next morning, and I had these Gucci shoes. I'll never forget.
Yeah, but Bob missed the whole night. See, Bob wasn't awake through the whole night of what I had to go through.
Yeah, tell him. He was going outside all night because he kept hearing cops, right?
No, so Bob fell asleep, and then I fell asleep, and I woke up because it was so cold. And so when I get up, the door had been open for a while, and it was lodged open because of the snow. That's how cold it was. Like, that's how much it snowed. And I'm thinking, I couldn't find Johnny. I walk out. The snow is halfway to our van, and I see Johnny out in his underwear, no shirt, and he's hiding behind the van. And I'm yelling at him, like, what are you doing? And he's telling me that people are trying to steal his van. It was this beautiful van that we used for travel and had all this artwork on it. And he had his belts in there and everything. And I said, Johnny, you're insane. Get in here. Bob slept through the whole thing. So then the next morning, Bob wakes up and it was your Gucci loafers were missing, right, Bob?
Yeah.
And Bob thought Johnny had
Johnny wore them out in the snow.
and lost them. That's what you thought.
Yeah, and didn't they show up 6 months later?
Years later, it was one of our bags that was in a closet. But anyways, that was a funny story. But that was Johnny. But even that was hilarious because it wasn't like he sat there trying to harm anyone. He was seeing cops in the bushes, cops outside. I mean, but he, again, like Bob said, he fought, he won, he believed he deserved to do what he wanted, which was always partying. That was our thing. We'd lose him after a fight for a while, and I would be having to negotiate for his next fight. So it was always like this, it was just this routine of this is how it was, his highs, his lows, and then I'd have to get him back into training, and I had to do all these things, and Johnny was crazy. Like no one has ever met anyone, including me, as crazy as Johnny. I remember after the Beretta fight, and like Bob pointed out earlier, he was always worried. You want a fighter to quit fighting because you don't want them to lose their marbles. You want them to be well. We were scared to death for Johnny to quit fighting. He fought all the way up until he was 44 years old. And I remember he used to say, without boxing, I'll be dead within a year. Unfortunately, that's what happened. But I remember, there's so many stories in between, but The beginning of the end for Johnny was in 2007. Johnny had disappeared on me again, and my brother Robert and his wife, we always had this huge house with multiple houses, or a huge lot with multiple houses. My brother always lived with us with his wife and kids, and my brother Robert was 39 at the time. And I remember my mom was on dialysis. Her kidneys were failing. My grandmother lived with us. It was weird. Everybody moved in with us at once. And we always had huge houses. And I remember my sister Marie was there. Johnny's nephew Benny was there, who was a Golden Gloves champion. He was 23. I remember my brother Anthony was there. My kids and my brother's kids. And anyhow, we had to leave to New Mexico, Johnny and I mean, to Albuquerque, because we were living in Farmington. And Johnny and I drove out, and my brother Robert always was with Johnny. So we were all staying in the same hotel. And I had the baby with me, Nico. He was just a little baby. And Angela, my baby sister, was staying with me. She had her little baby. His name was Ricky at the time. She was pregnant with her other baby. And we're all in a hotel room. Johnny disappears. Days go by. My brother's looking for him. And I remember I said earlier in the podcast that if my brother wasn't with him, there was cause for concern because there was no one to watch him. We didn't know where Johnny was. And my brother was stalking him and calling him. And no, Johnny just wouldn't answer for any of us. And I remember my brother had to go back to Farmington to take care of my mom. I stayed behind. Finally, Johnny shows up, and he looks like, again, awful. And I put him, because we had a suite, I put him in the living room couch because I had the baby with me, and the baby would still drink bottles. And I was in the room, and Angela was in the other bed with her baby. And I kept getting up. So I got up to get Nico a bottle in the middle of the night. And I remember looking over, and Johnny was foaming at the mouth. And he was making these weird breathing noises. And I wake up Angela, and obviously something happened. We don't know. Obviously he was overdosed, but we didn't know that. So I was taught, you call 911, you don't say names. You just say, there's a male, he's having trouble breathing. We think he's overdosed. I don't give my name. I don't give Johnny's name, or else he'll be all over the radar. They come to the hotel, but they find drugs in Johnny's waistband, which I didn't bother to check. I didn't think. Anyhow, they take him to the ICU. I'm, in the hospital. Angela stays with my son. My other son's with my brother, Robert Gordy, up there in Farmington. And Johnny's in a coma. They don't think he's going to make it. And I'm just, going through the distress of everything and sitting there in the hospital yet again. This was after that incident, Bob, the last one where you said the fifth time. This was at that time the sixth time Johnny had been in a coma. There was a seventh time, which I'll get to, but the sixth time, we're in the hospital, and we don't think he's going to make it. And the media, they're messing with my family. They're calling my mom. They're calling my brother. And they're saying, give us a quote for Johnny's death. And my family's freaking out because they're not near me. They're 2.5 hours away. And they're saying, is he dead? Is he dead? And I'm like, no, he's not. Like, he's fine. Like, he's not fine, but we're in ICU. So anyways, that night, I remember this, it was on March the 13th. I remember, well, it was actually March the 12th. My brother Robert's calling, and he's like, please tell me if he's okay. And I said, I would tell you, and my brother was another fun guy like Johnny. He was always laughing. He could light up a room with his laugh. And Johnny and Gordy used to mess around, and Johnny would play him the Village People. My brother would play Johnny Boy George, and my brother had called me, and there was a Boy George song on. And like at first it was kind of like there was a lot of like everybody was just worried. So that night my mom calls me, and she tells me that Gordy hasn't come home and he's with Benny. And I'm like, well, he's not here. He's not answering for any of us. We're all calling him. He's not answering. Johnny's still in a coma. 9:30 rolls around. There's still no Gordy. 10 o'clock, no Gordy. They're looking for him at bars in Farmington. I'm sitting there with Johnny, but Johnny's still in a coma. He's not even talking. Anyways, that night about 3 a.m., Johnny wakes up finally out of his coma, and he wakes me up because I'm sleeping next to him. And he says, Robert G., that's what he called my brother, was here with Benny. And I said, what? I didn't hear him. And Johnny's like, yes, he was here. Don't tell me I don't know they were here. He said they wanted me to go with them, but I told them no, because you'll be mad at me. And I said, so then I'm believing it. I call Gina, my brother's wife, and I say, they're here, they're here. So everybody's looking for them in Albuquerque now. Everyone's looking, trying to find them. So next, that same morning, Johnny's going to be fine. And, I'm talking to my mom and I'm telling her he's fine. So everyone's still looking for my brother. My sister and my other brother end up in jail because they fist fought. It was a big thing. 11 a.m. rolls around and my mom's calling me and she's crying and she's screaming on the phone and she's like, he's dead, he's dead. And I'm saying, no, he's not, Mom. I thought the media was messing with Johnny again. And I said, he's not dead, Mom. He's right here. And she's crying. I can't understand her. And she's like, not Johnny, Gordlo, because she called my brother Gordy Gordlo in Spanish. And I said, what? And she couldn't even get it out. And then a police officer gets on the phone and he's like, what's your relation to Robert Gutierrez? I sent him his sister. And he was just I'll never forget his voice. He was so nonchalant. It was just like he was telling me the weather. Your brother was involved in a one-car accident and he didn't survive. And I'm telling the officer, like, you're wrong, because he was here at 3:00 in the morning. And he's describing the car and my brother's tattoos, and they found his passport. And I'm like, well, where's Benny at? And, Benny is Johnny's nephew, and he was living with us. And he said, what's your relationship? I said, I'm his auntie. He said, he's also deceased. And I'm like, what? And I'm freaking out. So then my brother Anthony gets on the phone and everybody's crying. And I'm just, beside myself because Johnny's alive and they're not. And I remember just shaking and crying. And I remember running out of the hospital and I didn't know what to do because I couldn't believe it. And it got even more real because they asked me to go to the hospital to identify his body because my mom couldn't do it, Gina couldn't do it, Johnny was in a coma, so I had to go over to the UNM to the place, and it was the worst experience of my life. That he had wrecked in a car that flew the size of a football field, and he was airborne. And he was trapped in the vehicle. Benny got ejected, and my brother was mangled. And I had to identify him, and they didn't even clean up his body. And I couldn't even recognize him. The only reason that I knew that it was him was tattoos in his finger, the way he was pointing. And I remember going back to the hospital, and I'm thinking, how do I tell Johnny? Because, we're all close. And so I get with the doctor. They bring a psychiatrist. We all go in and we tell him. And I'll never forget the scream that Johnny let out. It was like an animal. I've never heard a scream like that. And Johnny blamed himself because Gordy was his best friend. And they were on the way to Albuquerque because people kept messing with them, trying to get quotes of Johnny's death. But Johnny wasn't dead. So they both died in this horrific car accident. And after that, things just went downhill because that was 2007. And then by 2009, my grandmother, she, there was a lot of things changed. Johnny went into another comatose event where he almost died, and come to find out he was trying to take his life and he shot himself up with insulin. They didn't think he was going to make it. He gets out of that. He still fought, but nothing was ever the same. On the day that my mom passed away, Johnny was sentenced to prison. My brother passed, Benny passed, my grandma passed. 2 weeks after my mom passed. The day my mom passed, Johnny went to prison, and then he's in prison for a year. And then I remember when he got out, he was on fire to make money, and he was like, I got to do this. My time's short. He said, I had a dream. My mom told me it's time to go home, and I didn't believe him. I was like, Johnny, you're always so morbid. You're going to live forever. We're going to raise our grandchildren together. So he gets out of prison, and he's fighting like a man possessed, and he's getting us back on top. And by then I started my other business because Johnny said, you need to be able to take care of yourself, and you need to do all these things. And I'm like, okay. And he finds his dad at that time. His dad had been to prison 3 times for various things, and he inherited this new family, and our life was changing. I couldn't keep up with it. And I just remember in 2011, he fought his last fight. Less than a year later,
Johnny had said his birthday was February the 13th, 2012. And I remember his last interview, and he tells them, because they're like, Johnny, you know, you look good. What are you going to do for your next birthday? And Johnny said, I don't think I'll be here, but he planned his whole funeral. April 30th was my brother Robert's birthday. And I remember showing Johnny a picture at the gravesite, and you could see the kids in front of my brother's gravesite, and you could see his face in the background. And I remember showing Johnny that April 30th, 2012. Johnny got the chills, and he was like, that's who they're sending for me? Robert G? And I said, what are you talking about? And he's like, I got to plan things. He planned his whole funeral, and he did die May 27th of 2012. And after that, 6 months after Johnny, my sister Marie died, and a couple of years ago, my other brother died. And so it's been a long, journey, and sorry to get emotional on this podcast, but it's like when you ask about what he meant to this world, it was like this fire was snuffed out, and everybody that loved him and loved me, they're all gone. And now we have the kids. They're continuing the journey. And people love him, and they still love Johnny, and things are still, I've been through a lot of trials and tribulations, and you know what though, I always go back to the beginning, because like Bob likes to say, without Johnny without Teresa there's no Johnny, but without Johnny there was no me. And so that's what's hard to continue on, because we were one unit. Now he's not here, but getting back to life now, things are great. I own several businesses. I've maintained success throughout it all. I'm raising my boys. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished together as this unit. And there's, my book will be coming out, and there's things that I could never say in there, but I put enough in there. It was a journey that I would never forget, but I'm proud of as a woman. I'm proud of as his wife. I'm proud of as a manager. It doesn't have to, just because you come from humble beginnings, or you come from places that you weren't meant to make it, or because you're a woman, or you're Latina or Latino, doesn't mean that you can't realize your dreams. I've surpassed everything I ever thought I was going to be. And so did Johnny. And now we're giving that gift to our kids. So fast forward where we're at now, the kids, it's the next, generation, and the legacy is continuing. And these boys, they carry Johnny like you wouldn't believe. Their torch is so bright. Their dad lives in them. They fight like him. They act like him. They act like me. Two craziest parents you could ever ask for on the planet, because, it's amazing. It's amazing. What life has given us. It's, even though for all the hard stuff, there's been so many happy memories and funny stories that I can sit here all day and tell you. Like I told you, even the hard times are funny. When Johnny fought Danny, he boarded up my house with plywood because they were high on meth. They're hiding in a tree. He got arrested. He had no trainer. But all this is funny. It's not. Maybe it shouldn't be, but that's the trauma that we had with each other. And, and Bob and I can tell you how many of the stories, like behind the scenes in boxing, him and I would laugh and we'd joke, and we're still doing the same kind of things. And, we sit there and we laugh for hours about everything. And life is just, it's never stable. It's never been stable for me. It's never been steady for Johnny or stable for Johnny, but we continue to move with it. And, my greatest gift to Johnny is continuing his legacy, and I'm going to continue to do that no matter what happened. I'm not going to ever let anyone forget about that man. And I will.
Teresa, what I want to interject, which you forgot to mention, and this rocks people. Now think about this. In the history of New Mexico, it was the largest memorial in history.
It was
over 7,000 people. 7,000 people, and they turned away thousands more.
He did.
Never in the history of New Mexico has there been a bigger memorial. And that says it all about Johnny Tapia.
And he planned it, Bob. Like because you got to remember, as I was saying, April 30th, my brother's birthday, 2012, May 1st, Johnny began planning his funeral. He wanted Al Hurricane and Darren Cordova to play for him. He wanted it to be at the Pit because that's where he won his first world title. He said, because Whitney Houston died that same year in March, if you remember, and he knew Bobby Brown.
And he knew, like, he was so sad for her because people were capturing her in her coffin. And Johnny said, don't let them do that to me. I don't want people to see me laying in a coffin. He said, oh, the family can see me to say goodbye, but I want it closed. I want them to remember me as a champion, not in a coffin. He said, don't ever do that to me. And the day he died, it was another crazy day. I can tell you, almost pinpoint the exact second his heart stopped beating, because I remember a feeling of pain. It was weird. There was so many things that led up to that day and finding him, because I found him also. And I just remember, like, as much as I was grieving and I was so insane, like, I couldn't believe that he wasn't coming back. Like, I kept telling everybody to wake him up because he always comes back, but this time he didn't. And when they carried him out of the room, and I remember they put him in the living room and they told everyone to say goodbye. And then I went into protection mode, like what I've always done with Johnny. Don't there was TMZ was out there. There were so many trucks and fans. Everybody had already heard about it, and they had to get him into the back of the coroner's truck. And I made everyone have a barrier. We held up, these huge comforters around him. They were not going to get a shot of my husband in a body bag. They were not going to get a shot of it. They tried. We protected him. We got him in. When we picked him up and when he was at the funeral home, for those that were close to Johnny, I allowed them to come in, but they had to put their phones in a basket. They weren't allowed to take pictures of him in his coffin. I was going to give him what he wanted, and I did. And for his memorial service, like Bob pointed out, they thought I was crazy to rent the pit, but I did. I rented it, and 7,500 people or 7,700 people were. That was the last count. They turned away thousands because they didn't have enough staff. They didn't think it was going to be that big. People were out there wrapped around that building. There's footage of this, 7 a.m. lined up, waiting to see their hero. And I did the best I could. I put him in the middle of the ring, and I had all of his belts and pictures, and he didn't want it to be a sad occasion. And people spoke, and we told stories, and I was in pain, but I had to give him what he wanted. And then again, it turns kind of funny. Next day, it's the service. It's supposed to be just family. Well, because of Johnny's family that he found out about a couple of years prior to this, and where Johnny originally came from, it's this gang stuff again. They shut down all the freeways in New Mexico, and they didn't let us have our typical, procession to the burial site. And they closed down all the freeways, and we only had to pick 5 cars that could go. And people had to meet us at the cemetery because they were worried about a war coming out. So here, Johnny, the only type of people to get that kind of escort are officials, like our government officials, whatever. Johnny got that same treatment for different reasons, but hey, I still take it as a win. And so he got and Johnny would love being in the spotlight. So it was so perfect to give him everything that he wanted. And like I said, and now it's just about continuing his journey for him, because I believe the boys have been the gift. And Johnny knew, because we used to talk about it, because he'd always say, I'm going to die before you, and I'd say, no, you're not. And he'd say, Chisa, God's not cruel enough to leave me with those boys raising them, because who knows what they'd be. They're going to be left with you, thank God, right? But now, like I said, that's where we're at in life. And there's so many funny, great, amusing stories that I've been telling Bob he needs to do a fan book on them, because Bob's in plenty of books, but I think he's the person. I think you and Bruce Trampler should write a fight and fan book about Johnny. That's my take on things, because there's so many stories that people don't get to tell, Bruce. I mean, Bob, that you and Bruce could tell, with fights in the fan.
Let me interject this though. See, it's the average people. Don't think about it. The average person would hear Johnny's background: prisons, jails, gangs, drugs. I'm going to tell you something. He's one of the most lovable people that I've ever known. Mm-hmm. Which I used to always tell Teresa every time he'd screw up. I'd say, Teresa, I can't stay mad at him. He had this lovable, like a little puppy dog. You wanted to love him. And it was like nothing I've ever seen. If you heard this stuff about other people, you'd go, get me away from those people. Johnny was like, the more I heard that, I got to tell you this story. I used to tell Johnny, I used to take him to meetings at AA meetings. I said, Johnny, you could.
Tell them about no,
I'm
good.
going to tell that Rio
Tell
Doso.
about that walkout with the walking the line. Tell them about that funny story.
Which one?
The rehab in California. That's what I'm talking
Oh
about.
yeah, okay. I'm going to tell you two stories. One's Rio Doso and that. There's a rehab in California called Impact. James Caan, the actor, started it, and his brother Ronnie Caan was in there. Ronnie's one of my dearest friends, and so is Jimmy. But anyway, Johnny's in there. They put him in this. I heard nothing but good things about the rehab. So this guy that runs the rehab, Ed Ward, he says, we do not want anybody to be treated special in here because Jimmy Caan's been here and his brother Ronnie Caan. There's no celebrity treatment here. Everybody's the same here. And he was always saying that the men don't talk to the women. Everybody's the same. This was hilarious. I would come and get Johnny and take him to meetings and take the gangbanger with us. So we'd go down to Malibu to meetings and I'd bring him back because I was his sponsor, so I could do that. So one day he's leaving there for good, right? So I'm there with him and he's got his suitcase with him and they're packing up. There's like every guy in the rehab. Remember, you're not supposed to treat people special. They're taking pictures with him as he's leaving, hugging him, getting him to sign.
Why did he leave, Bob? Remember, he broke into the pharmacy and drugged
Oh, yeah. And wait till this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ronnie Caan was talking about this the other day. He was scoring there. I said, Johnny, you could score on the moon. He had the guy in the pharmacy on the take. He had the guy in the commissary on the take. He was getting all the food he could eat. He was getting drugs, and he was so smart. I went to a meeting in there with him. This is Johnny. He says, see this guy that's leading the meeting? He says, Bob, after 3 minutes, he's going to start crying. And sure enough, 3 minutes, Johnny had heard him. This guy starts crying. Johnny picked up. I'm going to tell you this. We went into a bar in Albuquerque. This is Johnny. I'll never forget it. He and I in a bar in Albuquerque. He walks in. He was quick. His eyes were quick. He would size up things. We walk in the bar. We sit down. And he just looked around the room in 2 seconds. He says, Bopper, the bartender's screwing the cocktail waitress. The guy at the end of the bar is a drug dealer, and there's a narc in the back in the green shirt in the back. In 2 seconds, he had the whole place figured out. So he knew his surroundings instantly, and he read people. He knew if people really loved him and were affection. He knew it. And the last thing I'm going to say, Teresa, this is the best one. They're training in Rio Doso before a big fight. Now, Rio Doso, Teresa said, we got to get him out here where there's nobody around, no drug, because Teresa and I would watch and always checking the toilets and checking this and checking that. There's nobody around, right? So I'm talking to Teresa. And I said, well, how's it going? And she says, well, everything, Johnny's, I think he might be doing something. He's acting a little strange. But there's been nobody here. Well, listen to this. Teresa's mother, Annie, had this boyfriend named Gilbert. Yeah. Who was a straight-laced guy. Okay. And Gilbert would drive a truck once every week from Albuquerque out to bring food for him to eat.
Well, once a month. It was like once a month they'd come to visit and stuff and check on us.
Yeah. And so what we found out later, Johnny had his buddies in Albuquerque putting drugs in the wheel well of the truck. So when Gilbert would bring the food out, Johnny would get the drugs out of the wheel well of the truck. But it was when I heard that, I went, "Oh my God!" Gilbert, who was one of the most, house guys, just totally straight-laced guy, was bringing the drugs from Albuquerque.
And transferring him. He's driving 11 and a half hours. And here, little does he know, there's all these drugs on the wheel taped to
absolutely.
the wheel or the gas tank. He would do two, or not the gas tank. He would do the wheel. Yeah, it was the wheel that he would do.
But the guy would give you the shirt off his back. He would help anybody in the world, and the most loyal guy in the world. You talk about loyal. If you're in his circle and he likes you, forget about it.
Even if you weren't, like, I remember we lived in Big Bear. He bought people houses. I remember there was this story, and I remember going to this diner. It was called Sugar Bear Diner, and all the fighters used to go there.
Oh yeah, all the fighters.
Yes, there. And there was this waitress there. Her name was MT, and she was this nice waitress. She always helped us. She had 2 boys. They loved Johnny. Her husband was this huge man. He was as tall as Bob. He used to be a lumber person. He'd cut the trees for a living. Like very serious, very like rough and tough looking, the big beard and everything. And I remember one time, MT was talking to us, and she was saying that they had been sleeping in the car because they lost their house. And I remember Johnny just sitting there quiet, and we leave, we go home, and Johnny says, I'll be back. He takes off and he comes back a few hours later. He's like, come with me, come with me. And we said, what? He went and bought them this double wide trailer, paid cash for it, and had all the paperwork. He didn't know how to fill it out. He's like, can you get it ready? Can you? And I'm like, what are you doing? But that was Johnny, and I never stopped him from being him. And, we go to the diner, and he tells MT, get your husband, your kids, follow me, follow me. And they don't know what's going on. They're like, Johnny, we're working. He's like, and he's telling the owners, like, don't worry about it. So we all go driving to this place, and he gets out, and they're like, oh yeah, it's nice. And he bought it completely furnished for them, everything. And I mean, paid off cash. And he hands it over, and he says, congratulations, this is your new home. That huge man that stands as tall as Bob Case broke down in tears. He couldn't believe that somebody would do that. But that was just Johnny. And he was like, yeah. And they were like, how do we pay you back? How do we start payments? Johnny said, don't. He said, just remember, and if anyone ever needs help, you help them. That's all I asked for. I love you, buddies. Goodbye. Like, and he never brought it up again. He'd see him around. They would always try to thank him. Johnny would be embarrassed. Like, I don't want to hear it anymore. It's done. It's over. And then I remember another time when him and I were in California. We were living in Big Bear. We'd go down the hill. That's what we call it, because everything was, down the hill. So we were driving, and there was this Mexican lady, and she was pregnant, and she had like two little kids on one side, another little kid on the other side, and she's carrying groceries. And Johnny pulls over, and he's asking her, do you want to ride? And of course she's scared, like, no, she's telling him. And he's just watching her, and he was so like, I don't know, Johnny just was like, I can't do this. He walks to the first car lot, buys her a car cash, has me follow him, takes it back, hands her the keys with the title and everything, and tells her, here. And she started crying. And we never saw the lady again. But those are the kind of things that Johnny would do. And he didn't want to be publicized for it. He never let me talk about it. He'd say, you do things out of the goodness of your heart. You don't do it for recognition. People do it because they want to be recognized. They're not doing it out of their heart. It's not pure. I give things because it's pure. And he did that his whole life. We both did. We took care of so many people. And Johnny would say, I don't care. I'm going to do it till the day I die. And he did. He used to say, money is not my God. And then Bob always used to tell him, when do you see a hearse pulling a U-Haul? He took that with him for the rest of his life. He'd say it over and over and over. He was like a little sponge. Whatever Bob would teach him, then Johnny was saying it, and I'd hear it twice. One side with Bob, one side with Johnny.
I would hear Johnny on an interview sometimes, and it would sound like me talking.
Yes.
He was using all the stuff I taught him. It was great. He was just great. I mean, just unbelievable. And Big Bear, I remember Johnny had a 3-wheeler, and one day we went up, and these 3-wheelers scared the hell out of me because he was going on that like he fought. And we were up on the top of the mountains, and we sat up there one night for about an hour. And he told me things that I will die with, that how this guy survived, how he lived, and how he still, with all the shit he had been through, spread light everywhere. I said he was like Tinkerbell. He spread pixie dust everywhere he went. And Teresa, hearing what she has been through, she's lost everybody except me. She's lost everybody and her 2 boys, and she's still standing. So, I mean, what a woman. What I have as much respect and love for Teresa as any woman I've ever known in my life. And I've never known any other man or woman that's been through what she's been through, and still strong, classy, intelligent, sweet, beautiful lady. And I just love Teresa Tapia.
You tell him about the time when Oscar, he's the one that gave Johnny his name. Like, there's funny stories in boxing too, because Johnny was so crazy that he'd walk in beat up with stitches, broken nose, and Oscar, De La Hoya, we were at his camp at the time. He would say, Tapia, what did you do now? And Johnny always had a crazy story. Oh, Oscar, there was these guys and I was fighting them. And so as soon as Johnny would walk in after that, Oscar would always call him Mi Vida Loca. The Oscar and Robert Alcazar would call him Mi Vida Loca. And I remember Oscar got Johnny his very first endorsement deal with Bum Equipment. And Oscar had ordered Johnny a brand new uniform, didn't tell Johnny. And Johnny walked in and he says, "Look, Johnny, but on the trunks it said Me Vida Loca." And Johnny said, "No, Oscar, I'm Babyface Assassin." And Oscar said, "No, you are Mi Vida Loca." From that moment on, that became Johnny's ring name. And it actually suited him better because it is who he was. And people don't change their names. But Oscar gave him that because he used to tell Johnny, "You're too crazy. You're just the craziest guy ever." And Oscar, he spoke for Johnny's services. John King spoke for John. There was tons and tons. Mike Tyson, everybody was very, very
Mike
touched.
Tyson loved Johnny, loves Johnny.
They grew up together. They were there's funny stories. Maybe you could get them out of Mike when you have them on your show, Bob. But they talk about Finland Junior Olympics, and Mike just laughs, and he will not, neither him nor Johnny would tell me the story about Finland and them. They I still don't know it. They'll never tell me. Mike's taking that to his grave. But I don't know what it was. But that's what I'm saying. There was, for every heartache and tragedy, Johnny brought so many good memories, so many pleasant memories.
How about it? I always said if I'd raised Johnny Tapia in Westlake Village or Malibu, he could have been a doctor, a lawyer, a Major League Baseball player. How about this? I knew a guy. There was a guy in AA. He was. I'll never forget. He said, I was in the joint with Tapia. And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'm sure." And he says, "You know what, Bob?" He said, "Johnny was the best basketball player in the whole place." And I said, that made me know he was in the joint with him to know that, because nobody else would know that. Johnny Tapia was a tremendous basketball player. Tremendous for a little guy like that. A point guard. Unbelievable.
He was. And everybody told that Johnny's favorite sport wasn't boxing, it was basketball. It was like Bruce Sharpler, his favorite sport's not boxing, it's baseball. But they, that's just how it is, and Johnny didn't have he had a lot of people that loved him, and Johnny loved everyone. But Johnny had this void in his heart, like he felt like he could never fill it after his mom passed. And, we spent our lives trying to give him that. And unfortunately, he didn't find the peace here in this world. And people say they hope he's resting at peace now. But I say differently. I'm like, he better not be resting at peace, because he left me unsettled in this world. So he better not rest till I get there with him. Then he can rest. So I don't wish him like peace. And I say it because I can, because he left me in a world of crazy, crazy things that I've had to navigate, things I never thought I would be a part of. Like I tell you, Bob knows a lot about my afterlife, aftermath of the life with Johnny, and things didn't get easier. They got crazier. And, but it, again, what doesn't break you makes you. And that's how I feel. I feel that, I've went through a lot of bumps and bruises and obstacles, and I'm sure I'll continue to go through them. But I've learned to be that. Johnny was that fighter in the ring and out of the ring, and he taught me to be that. And you can't feel sorry for yourself. Johnny, you'd say, you're not going to get anywhere. My dad taught me that. You can't sit there and cry. What are you going to do about it? Do something about it. Nobody wants to hear you. No one's going to come and rescue me. And I guess I had to learn that the hard way. Johnny did save me, and I saved Johnny. But since his death, no one's going to come and rescue me. And I had to learn that the hard way. And I'm talking about stuff that, I've had my car blown up. I've had just crazy, crazy things have happened. And I used to be sad, and I used to be scared. But then you learn, like, acceptance is peace, peace is acceptance, and no one's going to come and save me anymore. I can never expect another Johnny. So I had to suck it up, and you got to take that deep breath, and you get up every morning, and you're like, all right, let's see how I face today. And I do it now for Johnny and my children. That's all that keeps me going and strong. It's not anything else. I don't want anything else. I don't lack for anything. I live a very comfortable life, but I have to continue until my last breath is taken. Then Johnny can have his peace with me. We'll probably argue too when I get there, because I've done a lot of dumb stuff, but he left me in this predicament, so that's his fault. So we'll have a lot of good reunite. We'll be reunited. I think we'll be happy and we'll be sad, but we'll both be at peace. And that's all I can shoot for, because tomorrow's not promised. And Johnny used to say, like, yesterday's gone, tomorrow may never come. Today I'm okay. funny. That's what I learned to live by, those words of wisdom. And I do the best to be a mother and to my children. And I wish nothing but big things for him because that's what Johnny wanted. We had our children because we wanted to make a better life for them. And I hope that that's what we are accomplishing. And, Johnny was he was the person that paved the way for us. And we can either look that and walk away from it and disgrace his memory and his legacy and everything that he lived and died for, or we can continue going on and proving that he did his life, as short as it was, because he died at 45, meant something. He made his mark on the world. And we have to be here to continue to show that. And he has one of the most interesting, most entertaining boxing stories. Nobody will ever touch it because you have death and you have gangs and you have drugs and you have triumph and you have championships and you have heartache, but you have such a loving, giving person. There will never be another one like him. And I want the world to know who he was and what he stood for. And he didn't ask for the life he was given, and I didn't ask for mine. But it's not about asking for it. It's what you do with the life that you have. Yes, he went through hardships. Yes, so did I. But what are we going to do about it? Sit there and give in? Johnny could have given in many times. He could have died, long before this. He could have stayed in prison. He could have never dug himself out of that hole. But he chose to be a champion, and he's always going to be that person. And now, the legacy continues, and we keep moving forward. And all we can do in the end is you want to be worth something. It's not about money. I mean, maybe it's about money to most people. With me, it's about what are people going to remember about you after you're gone? And look at the talks you've heard here. Go to Johnny's social media. The guy's been gone almost 14 years this month, and you'll see nothing, 500,000 followers on Instagram. Who does that? Johnny does that. Heartwarming stories, story after story about how Johnny gave them, how Johnny saved them. People from prison, people, white collar people, blue collar, prison, thugs, gangsters, moms, you name it. And the letters pour in.
And this same guy, Teresa, that was in prison with Johnny, you know what he told me? His name was Brett.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was a good basketball player. And this is why I knew he wasn't lying. He said Johnny came up and told him, Brett, if anybody screws around with you, you come to me. And that was Johnny. You know what I mean? That was Johnny liked it. He said, if anybody messes with you, you come to me. And, and how about we haven't talked about, he was internationally known. I have friends from London. I have friends from Scotland. They all love.
He holds the record, Bob, at your call in London when he fought there. Remember, there was a championship fight there, and they couldn't sell it out to save their lives. They added Johnny. It sold out in record time. He holds the record at your call, which is one of the toughest places for fighters to make it. And they wrapped the flag, of England around him. They cherished him. He came in with the Spanish music. I told him you should come in with the soccer jersey and listen to their music. He said, nope. I'm from Albuquerque. I'm proud, and I'm not going to do it. And you know what? They were dancing to that New Mexican music, and they embraced him. And when they still have the 10 count bells for him, when Johnny passed, but that shows you in Scotland, guys falling at their feet crying. I mean, it's insane. Where it wasn't just his culture.
Teresa, I remember he called me on the phone. I'll never forget it. When you guys were in the UK.
Uh-huh.
He says, Bopper, I'm walking down the street in London and people are mobbing me for my autograph. He couldn't believe. I said, Johnny, boxing is on seen in 240 countries on HBO and Showtime, but he could not believe that everybody on the other side of the world knew him.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Look at the president of his fan club is from Australia. They're not from America. That's who he is. That's what he brought. Do you know that his fan club manager is flying in for his memorial? It's going to be his last U.S. trip. His first one is to come and see Johnny's gravesite, and now he's coming. His last trip, because he's getting older and he can't travel, he's coming for Johnny's memorial and to watch his kids fight. That's the magic.
How about the guy that was just arrested, Daniel Kinahan, the number one?
Oh, yeah. He would have loved that. Johnny
they just got him in Dubai. He's only 48 years old, and he'll probably, unfortunately, be doing the rest of his life in prison. But the fighters loved him. Tyson Fury loved him. He got Tyson sober, got him to lose 150 pounds and fight. And he's helped a lot of fighters. He loved Johnny Tapia, Daniel Kinahan. And that, it says it all. I mean, I've heard from people that know Daniel, guys that work with him, that Johnny was one of his favorite fighters.
People Johnny loved. Johnny had a bunch of celebrities. He had Mickey Rourke, Sammy Hagar. He had. He had just countless. I can't even think of them all. There was.
They were always around.
William Forsythe. Yeah, he had so many people that gravitated towards him from the music industry, the acting industry, from other sports. And I mean, you name it, and they loved Johnny. They all knew about this crazy little New Mexican guy who wore the heart on his sleeve and had the heart of gold. And he fought like a warrior that should have been born 8 feet tall. But here he was, this little giant that made his way into people's hearts and people's TVs. And he was a crossover, and he was the highest paid athlete in his weight class at that time, thanks to Johnny, because he was able to transcend those little guys into things that, attention getters that people wanted to watch. He set a lot of trends. Tattoos. Nobody got tattoos. And Bob would get mad, and he told Johnny, don't change the tattoo. Johnny overdid it, and so did everyone else. Once Johnny started getting tattoos, first you'd see them copying just the one on his chest. Next thing you know, now they all want to be covered in tattoos. But it wasn't considered pleasant, back then. It was considered, don't do that. You don't do that. Now everyone does it. But again, Johnny set the precedence for so many things in boxing, in life, as a human being. He used to teach Bob lessons. He would tell Bob, you got to work on your marriage, Bob. You got to do this, Bob. You can't.
I've always said, people used to say how I helped Johnny Tapia, and I said, stop. I said, he probably helped me more than I helped him, because believe me, I was watching him, and I learned more wonderful things from watching him. Believe me when I tell you that. He helped me in a lot of areas I was weak in my life. A lot of areas he really, really helped me.
But that's what made him unique, Harper. If you look at it, there's all these crazy stories. Yes, he had to do what he had to do to survive. Yes, I had to do what I had to do to survive and to continue to survive. But that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a survivor, because you're going to either get beat by this world or you're going to conform to it. And Johnny
couldn't help what he was born into. I mean, I always told Johnny, one day he said, Bopper, am I a bad guy? And I looked at him, I said, no, Johnny, you're a good guy. You're just a product of your environment, like we all are.
Mm-hmm. But Bob, saying that about Johnny, and he struggled with it. And here was the difference. And I probably shouldn't say this because it doesn't make me look good. But the difference between Johnny and I was he had to conform to what his life was, right? And it bothered him. And he took it to his graveside. He was always sad about the things he had to do. I didn't lose a night's sleep over it. What does that tell you? He was a great, pure in heart individual. What does it say about, like, when people say, oh, Johnny was crazy? Yeah, but he was crazy because he had to be, and I had to be what I had to be, but I could live with things easier than he did. And that's the scary part. And Johnny loved that about me. He used to tell everybody, I'd rather fight anybody in the world. He's like, you are the real, he would laugh at me and say, oh, you're the real gangster. Because I'd be like, you do what you got to do and you move on and you keep going.
Hey, Harper, I've worked with all 5 families, believe me. And I've always said, I wasn't, the only one I don't want mad at me is Teresa. If that tells you anything. I meant it too. One time I thought she had my line tapped. I meant she would get a look on her face, and I've seen it 1,000 times. We'd be around a bunch of people, and I'd look at her, and I called it the blank look. It was like a blank stare. And whenever I saw that blank stare, I went, holy shit, somebody's going to be in some serious trouble.
But again, I'm a product of the environment, like Bob said, like I told you, I had a pretty decent childhood till I was 5. I got raped by my grandfather, and it changes the makeup and how you think. But it didn't break me. It just taught me that, okay, this is life. It's not a fairy tale. You are going to suffer. And I knew from that moment growing up. And when I moved away with my father, what was happening here in Albuquerque with my mom, my oldest brother was hooked on sniffing paint. He was chasing people all night with axes, breaking down doors. He was out of his mind. I remember coming home to visit, and my grandmother and my mom would lock me out at 12 years old to take away the axe from him because I had a calming effect. Because we went through so many doors and windows in my childhood home in Albuquerque. And I remember sitting in the car with him, and the smell of paint to this day brings back so many memories. Remember listening to old Journey, sitting in his lowrider, but it was on blocks, and he'd be sitting there sniffing paint. And then it was like a game. I was young. I remember waiting for him to have to go to the restroom, and I would hide the axe and the hatchet. I remember times I'd be asleep and I'd feel somebody staring at me, and he'd be over me with the hatchet just staring. And he'd always say that he was hearing voices to murder his family. But for whatever reason, it had a calming effect. That's how I grew up. I didn't grow up easy. Like, that's what people don't get. They think I got with Johnny and I fell into this life of luxury and he had all this money and I took it all and I was this little princess. No, that's not what happened. I grew up in a very brutal, hard world with my dad. My dad, we were stable financially, but my stepmom made it mean. She used to abuse me when my dad was gone. It was walking on eggshells. I had to hide from my dad, what my stepmom was doing. And my own stepmom, she didn't even let me go to my dad's funeral. I couldn't even attend his funeral. She tried to ban me from saying bye to him in the hospital. My dad died at 46. He was the center of my universe, and he was taken. I couldn't even tell him bye. I couldn't even attend his funeral. But again, my dad taught me, you don't cry over it. And if you're going to, you get it out and you figure out how to resolve the problem. So he gave me that strength. And then when I moved back to New Mexico, oh my gosh, the family was a mess and things were just so different. So by the time I met Johnny, the crazy stuff he would do to me was very normal to me. I don't even know. It's so funny. I didn't find out till after Johnny died that I'm considered just as crazy as he was. I'm not trying to be, don't want to be, but Johnny covered it with his public persona. And then, like I told you, my car was blown up. I had hits put on me. I had DAs trying to put me in witness protection program for my safety. And of course I didn't do it. And, I went through a lot of crazy stuff on my own. But in the end, I'm right here. And the day that I'm not here, it's okay. It's okay because I still have a lot of people on that side. My only reason for here is to continue Johnny's legacy and to work with my children. And I've learned a long time ago, like, I'm expendable. And I know that. And it's okay. I don't mean to sound morbid or crazy or anything like that. It's just what you do in life. It's what you become. It's what you know. For whatever reason, I was the expendable one. So whatever happened to me, doesn't matter. What matters is what I do with it. And so I'm going to continue pushing forward and trying to give my kids a good life. And all I care about is that my kids are taken care of. And whatever they evolve into, it's because I had a hand in it and Johnny had a hand in it. And our crazy lives, our crazy childhoods, my kids didn't have to go through that. The only thing I couldn't save my children from, and I couldn't protect them from, was death, because it happened so much. I mean, I can tell you a story about my youngest son. As a mother, it kills me. There was a kidnapping ransom on him. I had to send him away for a few years. He had to live in different places in different countries before he was safe to come home. That's the kind of life I live without Johnny. That's why I told you. It's like it's a crazy, crazy world. And, but looking at it, you look at the bright side of everything. I've learned to be an optimist. My son, maybe he went through that, but you know what? It taught him to be a hell of a fighter, because it was like Johnny. By the time Johnny got in the ring, life had screwed him up so bad, and he went through so many tough and bad things. The boxing became his, easy. It was just his place to show the world something he loved doing. And I see that in my children. My older one, he's an entertainer. He does backflips. He does all these things. He's a boxer. The younger one is he's a warrior, because he was gone. He was gone. And thank God, he's here to live another day and get in that ring and fight. And those are the decisions I've had to make as a mom without Johnny at my side. Had Johnny been at my side, I probably wouldn't have fell into such things, but he wasn't here. And so you keep on going. And that's my whole thing. It's like, I am not ashamed about it. I used to be scared. I used to be like, oh my gosh. And, I was worried about being judged. I don't give a shit what people say anymore. All I care about is you cannot please everyone. Nobody's walked in my shoes and nobody's lived through what I've lived through. And if you do and you get out and you're unscathed, good for you. I'm not unscathed. I'm a very, very, People put tattoos on the body. I have tattoos in my heart, in my soul, that will never heal because of what I've had to live through. But again, it didn't. I'm still here, and I'm here as long as God allows me to be here. And it doesn't matter about what people think or what people say. And nobody knows my life. And trust me, I get judged a lot. I've been slammed in the media. I have been dragged through the mud because people don't understand behind the scenes what I've had to go through. They think things were by choice or not. I don't. People just think that I'm just crazy and that I lost it after Johnny. No, I had to survive after Johnny. And that's what I do. And I'm very proud of where I'm at in life because, like I said, I'm still doing things. I still take care of myself. I still support myself. I still make my own money. I still get up every day and I still invent new ways to do things and be creative. I'm very proud of all the things I'm in. Bob was talking about 5 families. I'm involved in a lot of stories now that we're going to tell about some families. I have a, I've aligned myself with a lot of people. I've done a lot of things, and it's like I said, I am actually, my childhood, and my upbringing turned me into the person that I am today. And so I don't feel sorry for myself, and I don't look back like poor me. I needed all that to happen to endure. And I guess that's the best word, to endure life as it's been thrown at me and to continue to endure things. I had to go through all that stuff. But it's all worth it because I see a smile like when I talk to Bob and we talk about these Johnny stories and we could put the word out there, and people love to hear about Johnny and his triumphs, and he did have triumphs, and I'll never forget it. I'll never ever forget my time with Johnny, and it'll always be very, very special to me, and nothing will ever compare to it. And now my journey is mine, and I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it, and I'm gonna just continue moving forward. And I'm really honored that you both have taken your times out of your busy schedules to get to know me. And because that's what Bob said. People know Johnny and they know about your story with Johnny, but they don't know you. They don't know your background. They think I fell into this life of luxury. I never had it luxury. I never had a luxurious life. Nobody ever handed anything to me. I had one thing handed to me my whole life, my very first car that my dad bought me. Since then, nobody can say they've given me anything. Johnny and I earned it, and without him, I earn it. And I'm very.
Teresa, you've been steeled, haven't you, in a way that many people been through a fire, and in many cases, a constant um, meddling is the term. Um, Alchemy is trying to get gold out of the muck. And can you describe just briefly for us how some of the tough times, the people that you've lost, the memories that you have, the trauma that you've been through, how has that made you a better person?
I think it's made me appreciate life and those that are still in it. When you lose so many people so quickly, like I go to the gravesite, you got, like I said, two brothers, a sister, you got Johnny, you have your mom, you have your grandma, you have everybody, and you don't have a chance to focus on grief because it'll kill you. It would end your life, and I can't do that. I have boys. So it's taught me to appreciate the goodness in life. And I know it sounds weird because I've had a tough life, but I appreciate life every day. I wake up every day and I watch spiritual messages, and I like to listen to Joyce Meyer and Joel Osteen, and that's how I get my day going. And I thank God every day, and I try to love the people that are still in my life because you can't take things for granted. I learned the hard way. You can try to control it and you can think that you have security and you have all these things. You can sit there, like when Johnny died, you can have millions of dollars in the bank. That's not your comfort. I can't wrap up to $100 bill at bed at night or to a checkbook. I wanted my husband. I didn't care about anything else. All that mattered was he was no longer here. The people that molded me into the person I am, they're all gone. So I just keep moving forward. And so, yeah, I guess I just learned to not take life for granted. And I try to live every day like if there is no tomorrow. I try not to be afraid of anything anymore. I just try to go out there, and I try not to be negative. I try to, and believe me, I have a lot of pressure. If you saw my daily, how I wake up daily and what I go through daily, it's hard. It's like, most people are like, how the hell do you do it? I'm like, I don't know. You just do it. You just don't question it. And when I get to the end of the day,
I go to bed. I go to bed thankful, and I say my prayers, and I'm thankful that I got through another day. And and like I said, the day that I'm not here, well, I'm sure it's going to be like a lot of people that will, and there's going to be good and bad always, but that's life. There's not anyone that's pure good, and there's not anyone that's pure bad. And sometimes the good people do bad things in order to survive. And that's, I guess, my main point is I've been judged for so many things so harshly, but no one knows the behind the scenes. Just think about it. You can look up the story yourself. It's not anything that's not public. You see my car being bombed in front of my house. It wasn't an easy thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been out there. But again, I don't know how am I supposed to handle being a widow and navigating through all these hard things when I had never been a widow before and I thought I was going to be with Johnny for the rest of my life. Do I make the smartest choices? Probably not. Could I have done better? Probably so. But there was no one to guide me. My mom's dead. My dad's dead. I have no mentors. Everyone's gone. So it is what it is. And my poor kids, if anybody, they're the heroes of our story because they navigate life with Johnny as their father and me as their mother. And you know what? They're great kids. They're so handsome. They're so respectful. They love people. They have a great heart. So I think we did something right. We didn't damage them too badly. They're here and and even through all the hardships and the stuff that my youngest one went through, they're still here. And they're doing well.
Speaking of that, at the end of the month on the 30th, there's going to be a memorial fight. You want to talk about that a little bit before we go?
Yes. So this is a very special fight because my boys are now both pro. And and Bob knows Solomon. We call him Jonathan. Johnny called him Jay. His name is Solomon Jonathan Chavez. He's actually picked up the Tapia name. He was our first kid that we raised. And he was our trial and error baby because my sister birthed him, but I raised him. And Johnny, he called me mom. He called Johnny dad. And Bob would see him around. And my brother used to use him to go get girls and stuff. So he was like our trial baby. And anyhow, he's in his 30s, 32 now. He's coming out of retirement, hasn't fought in 11 years. That's how special this fight is, to honor his father, the only father he's ever known. And his birth father was never in the picture, but Johnny was. So they're all three boys now. You have Jonathan Chavez Tapia, and then you have Johnny Jr. and Nico Tapia, and you have Josh Pitbull Torres, who Johnny mentored as this little kid, growing up, who absolutely loves Johnny. You have Clinton Chavez. You have a bunch of other local talent. They're all coming together May 30th because we couldn't do it on the 27th when he passed because it was a weekday. So we're doing it on May 30th to finally honor Johnny with his boys being pro. This is the first year we could do this because Johnny, has been gone a long time, but the boys weren't pro. So now you have all three boys and Pitbull, who Johnny absolutely loved, and Clinton Chavez, and all of our amateur fighters will be on this card. It's going to be a night dedicated to Johnny because, like I said, the journey continues. The youth is coming up. All that Johnny's put in place is still happening. So we're just trying to honor him, and we're going to have a special night, and we're going to have, it's a New Mexican, it's Mexican culture. We're going to have this, instead of saying in Spanish, the best way I could describe it is in English. It'll be like this memorial board with Johnny's picture and flowers, and it's an honor. It's to honor him, and very special night. It's going to be a festival. We're going to have lowriders because Johnny loved lowriders. We're going to have music. We're going to have vendors. We're going to have food trucks. It's just going to be a very festive night because Johnny didn't want you to be sad or depressed. He always wanted everyone to be happy, and we're giving back to him. First year, his boys can do this as pros. So it's a big deal to the boys, and it's a big deal to Johnny. I know it's a big deal to Johnny.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so grateful that you are in so many different ways responsible for not only maintaining his legacy, but then with your sons and the boys, you have the ability to watch them grow and be a part of the business, so to speak, but the joy of actually fighting for a championship and all that. Thank you so much for that. Bob, before we go, I know there's some last words. There's probably 2,000 stories that we haven't heard, but give us a little bit more between you and the personal ways that you not only encountered Johnny, but were influenced by him Would you mind? Is there anything else that you'd want to say before we head out?
Yes, there is. First of all, I want to thank you so much, Teresa, for this incredible show. And you're such a breath of fresh air in this place, this effed up world. And it's amazing to think what you've been through, and you're still a breath of fresh air. And all I know today, I've always said there's a movie with Cary Grant and who was it, Errol Flynn. It's called My Father, The Bishop's Wife, and Cary Grant plays an angel in a human body walking around helping people. And I really think with all Johnny's demons, you guys were like angels, because I know that today I'm in the fourth quarter, but I am 100 times better person today because of having you two in my life. And what a gift that is. I mean, I know you guys I learned so much just from listening to you today, Teresa, about strength and God's blessings and living. We used to say in AA, pour me another drink. I've learned from you today, you don't feel sorry for yourself. You're just, and Johnny, he's up there watching all this crap. And I guarantee you, through all the shit you've been through since he's gone, he is proud of you. I guarantee it. And I'm proud of you, and I'm proud to know you and call you a friend that I love. And that's all. I just can't tell you how much I enjoyed seeing you, Teresa. You still, as I mentioned earlier, are not too hard in the eyes. I mean, you look great, and so I can't. You'd think with all the shit you've been through, you'd look like a haggard old broad, but you look effing gorgeous. So I love you, and I can't wait to see you. I'm going to see you, I know, soon. So thank you so much for brightening my day, and what great memories. Like Harper said, Teresa and I could talk for 2 days straight about and laugh. I mean, what did Milton Berle say? Laughing is like going on instant vacation. And you don't think I did a lot of laughing with Teresa over the years? I mean,
And still do.
I'm laughing right now. I'm laughing about some of the things we didn't tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Santa Monica, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Bobby. And hearing you say that, it just makes it all worth it. And it's like I told you, you can sit here in life and you can take it for granted, and you could be this, oh, poor me, like you said, and walk through life and with your head down. No, you know what? I've earned my place in this world, and I fought hard to get here, and so did Johnny. And I'm going to keep my head held high until those curtains fall down on me. And I just, I do what I can, and I appreciate hearing things from people like you, because like I said, you're a force of nature yourself, and the people that and what you've been through and all your experience, for you to even say those words to me, it's so touching. It's heartfelt, and I hope you know that. And you being a part of my life, our bond will never be broken. And you gave me a lot of strength in the beginning. You're the one that fueled the fire for me in the beginning, and you created this little monster unboxing. So Bruce and Bob and Don and all these people get mad. Well, you know what? They need to look at you and point the finger and say, Bob K started that. It wasn't me alone. So just so they have to know that. And I do want to say something before we end this. I would really like to give there hasn't always been the happiest times with different promoters, with Dan Goosen and Frank Warren, Bob Arum, Don King. But I just want to say thank you to all of them, and then Bruce Trumpler, because he was a really good friend of Johnny's. And because of who they were and their experience, and because they were such giants in our little tiny world, they were giants in their world. And because of them, Johnny had his talent displayed worldwide. Heavyweights fought under the undercard of Johnny. Johnny was one of the highest paid fighters of his time in his weight class. And that came from Showtime. People like Jay Larkin and Earl Fash and, Blue DeBella, all these people from, HBO to Showtime to all these people that believed in him, like Bob Case. Can you imagine how we started from humble beginnings, and you have those powerhouses on your side? I just, I may not have been the easiest to deal with because my life wasn't easy, but I always believed that everything I did, it was for fighting for Johnny, for what I believed was the right reasons. They may not have agreed with me, But I just say, looking back now with all the experience I have and growing wiser through all these years, I actually owe everybody a very big thank you, and I'm very humbled by working with them. I look back in fascination now of the people that I was able to cross paths with, and that's it for me. You know, I'm just so grateful, beyond grateful of the life that I've lived, thanks to many many people, but especially that man sitting right there. He taught me not to be scared, and he made me go forward, being a Latina and being a wife in this boxing sport. And he threw me out there amongst these wolves, is what we used to call it. But it, you know what? I'm very comfortable with them because they all trained me for my life. If I went through the hardships in boxing, how could I go through the hardships that I'm going through now or went through now? And so it all comes together. That's why I said I look at it now with a life learning and all experiences, and I'm very, very grateful to be part of this unique world that we've all created together. And Bob was there from the beginning, and I just want to tell you thank you for that, Bob.
Thank you, baby.
Love you.
Well, we appreciate so much, not only you being on, but for what you have given to us and for the listeners that are out there that get a very unique perspective. Dave Baker used to be the man in charge of the NFL Hall of Fame, and he was a 6'9" gigantic man that would pound this ring that he had, a class ring, and it would be on the door, and he'd knock on the door with an open hand. And you knew that if he were knocking on your door, you were getting into the Hall of Fame. And he had the privilege once of saying to me, but he said it to everybody. And so I will say to you, Teresa, for all that you've done and for all that you still have yet to do, not only for the world of boxing, but for the Tapia family name and for the boxing world and for all that you've done, thank you for all that you have done to contribute, and the respect and dignity and honor that are part of what you've been a part of in a very dirty world sometimes, where even Bob has said you need a shower after talking about boxing, but you've been a bright light in it, and we appreciate it greatly. We want to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in here today. What a special show that we've had. We want to say thank you not only to Teresa Tapia, but to Bob for introducing us to her and for scheduling her to be on. Thank you, Bob. What a wonderful job that you've done. I'm Harper LeBel. I want to say thank you for tuning in. This has been the Sports Page with Bob Case, and we're all a part of the 100 Yards of Football network, and we appreciate you being a part of the show. If you liked it, please subscribe, and if you didn't, well, tell somebody else, because I'm sure that they will like the show and they will certainly appreciate it. And as we grow, there are going to be other guests that we're going to have that are also great contributors, not only to the sport of boxing but in the sports world. So thank you all for being a part of it. We hope that you have a fantastic